Good evening, all. Welcome to the Monday, June 15th meeting of the City Council. I wanted to call our work session to order, and welcome to our Planning Commission friends. We should actually call it the work session of the Planning Commission because you guys actually outnumber us in person tonight. So thank you all for making time on a beautiful Monday night. Let's start with roll call.
Thank you, Mayor. Planning Commission Chair,
I'm here.
Mr. Duncan,
Here.
Ms. Freelander, Mr. Krasner,
I'm here.
Mr. Kranvinsky,
Here.
Mr. Polinsky,
Here.
Mr. Stevens.
Here.
Council, Mr. Egan, absent. Ms. Connolly,
Here.
Ms. Downs.
Here.
Ms. Flynn, absent. Mr. Snyder,
Here.
Ms. Underhill. Ms. Underhill, can you hear us before we do the virtual motion for you?
She said she can't hear us.
Oh, great. David, can you hear us?
Justine says audio doesn't work for half the people so far.
I could hear Letty briefly saying audio doesn't work. Otherwise, I cannot hear.
All right, well, we will counter here for the moment while we work on that. Do you want to try the ceiling audio again? Because it echoes. Miss Hardy?
Here.
There. Okay. All right, so
It's not, I could advise, I mean, it's not, it's gonna be delayed, but Justine could join Grants or YouTube.
Justine says she can't hear your mic. Is your mic on?
Oh, I don't have a mic, sorry, I was just talking to this.
Okay, so why don't we try that mic and see?
Hello, Justine, David. Can either of you hear me on this mic more consistently, or is it still coming in and out?
I can hear you consistently on that mic.
Okay,
Same.
Do
interesting.
people not have their mics on during roll call?
what's all-
How about this one? Can you hear this one? Testing one.
I can hear that.
So people just didn't have their mics on.
Justine, I'm doing an audio test off of my microphone. Can you hear Cindy?
Yes, I can.
Maybe. She didn't hear the mayor. Well, Matt's going to get this microphone. He talks louder than me.
Okay, well, we need to do Justine's electronic motion before we hand it over to staff.
Yes, please.
Madam Mayor, I move for that Councilmember Underhill, please identify your remote location reason for participation by electronic means.
I am in Falls Church, Virginia, and I'm participating remotely for medical reasons.
I move that the City Council approve electronic participation by Councilmember Underhill in this meeting for medical reasons pursuant to the City Council's adopted policy.
Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Connolly in the second. Can you call roll, please?
Thank you. Ms. Connolly? Yes?
Yes.
Downs, yes. Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
And Mayor Hardy?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes. Okay, you're in, Ms. Underhill.
But thank you.
She is telling me she can't see the,
Yeah, usually I can see the room. Oh, there it goes. Thank you.
okay. Awesome. So we're all good now. Okay, Wyatt, take it away.
All right. Good evening, everybody. So we'll, first item on our agenda for this joint work session with the Planning Commission is a discussion of the Virginia Village land use actions. And so we have the comprehensive plan. We have the South Washington Street Small Area Plan and the Downtown Small Area Plan. We'll also discuss the zoning, and then we'll talk about the request for proposals. So the Planning Commission and staff have been working on these items, so I think we'll get the benefit of the Planning Commission's views on these. We'll start off with a report from our planning staff, and I'll turn it over to our planning director, Matt Matusik, who will go through that material. And Matt, do you want to make introductions for staff and for JLL? Very good. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. We have several staff with us, Zoe LaRive, Jack Trainer, who've done a lot of the work that you're going to get into this evening. But before we get to the presentations, we also wanted to introduce another member of our team, Nick Finelli, who's sitting right there, is our real estate consultant with Jones Lang LaSalle. He's participating in today's site tour and also the conversation that we're going to get into, both on kind of the planning issues, but also transitioning into the other item on the agenda, which is the request for proposals. So we felt that was a good opportunity with Planning Commission here and everyone else to kind of have that experience and perspective to kind of guide the conversation as we go forward. But before we get to that, I will hand things over to Zoe and Jack to get through the first couple of items.
Sure. I can take the first item, which is a work session, the first of a suite of, as Matt said, a suite of Virginia Village-related items. And this first one is related to amending the planning opportunity area boundary number 2 to include all of the Virginia Village area. If we work our way down to the third page of the staff report. Now, these are 2 relevant maps taken from a document that was adopted as part of Chapter 4 of the Comprehensive Plan titled Revitalization Areas, Small Area Plans, and Urban Development Areas. And this document defines the boundaries of the planning opportunity areas where the city's identified potential for redevelopment. They're within the city's designated revitalization areas, of which there are 3. And those generally span the commercial corridors down Broad Street, South and North Washington Street, and then over on the east end. And so each of the planning opportunity areas designate the kind of area that a corresponding small area plan gives more detailed guidance on how redevelopment should form and what to prioritize. And so highlighted in yellow here are the Gibson Street properties in Virginia Village that were included in Planning Opportunity Area 3, and so correspond to a different small area plan and guidance than the rest of the Virginia Village site. And so when we started this initiative back in February, one of the initial work sessions, we heard some feedback about bringing all of the guidance for Virginia Village under a single small area plan rather than having to rely on 2 separate plans. And so as a bit of housekeeping, it'd be proper to adjust the planning opportunity area to include all of Virginia Village, to again bring that whole site under the guidance of the South Washington Street Small Area Plan, which we've been working to update with the feedback we've been hearing from the community and boards and commissions since March. And so that would technically require an amendment to the comprehensive plan because this document, again, defines the boundaries of those areas and is part of the comprehensive plan. So it's more of a housekeeping item, but warrants its own separate consideration.
Okay. People have questions or comments for Jack by bringing the 3 parcels into the South Washington POA? Okay. Mary Beth? I didn't see any head nods, I think, too.
So, Jack, this is more of a, and I was just asking Mr. Shields this question ahead of time. As I'm looking at the South Washington area plan, the downtown area plan, there are other significant parts of those that are both outdated. So as we bring them together, we're focusing on these 4 lots. I'm just wondering, is there a way to make a note of that this plan was updated specifically for this reason? These other things we know are outdated, but we're not going to attack them right now because you could really go down some rabbit holes about
Absolutely.
those small area plans.
And we kind of had to stop ourselves once we
Yeah, I
started
bet.
going
Yeah.
down those rabbit holes with the small area plans, because we're like, oh, this is really specific, and this is out of date, and this is talking about a business that doesn't exist anymore. So, you know, there's certain low-hanging fruit, and Zoe's going to talk more about this when we get the small area plans, but there's certain low-hanging fruit that we could easily address in this round. But yeah, I think we definitely made note in the small area plans about this initiative and sort of, you know, for historical reasons, why the city was taking up this initiative and wasn't addressing the entire small area plan. And so that's definitely noted in both plans and makes recommendations about returning to the larger plans at a future date.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else on this one? Last call for Planning Commission. Okay. We're ready to move on.
We're going to be done early.
This is the easy one first, I think. We save zoning for last. Okay.
All right, I can get this started. We're sharing a PowerPoint for the small area plan and the zoning because there is so much overlap. But if you go to the next slide, you'll see some of the upcoming schedule. So tonight, we are looking to, not tonight, next week, we are looking for the small area plans for a recommendation to Planning Commission for review, and then we will be looking at July for a public hearing. If you go to the next slide, this slide has been included in a couple different iterations, so you might have seen it before, but it aims to connect the different policies you're hearing about. So the comprehensive plan, which is what Jack was just talking about, is a wider reaching document. It goes citywide, it's more general. Then you go into the small area plans, which target these very specific defined areas, the boundaries of which we are looking to adjust just a little bit. And then once you get into the zoning, it's very specific. It's on individual properties. It's and it's tied to the two above because it's looking to advance those goals. So if you go on the next slide. So here you'll see the map with the original POA boundaries and Virginia Village in yellow. For the small area plan, based on the community meetings and many other engagement opportunities we have been conducting, we came up with 4 main areas that we are looking to update in the small area plans specifically related to the Virginia Village site. And those are building scale and density transitions, housing and affordability, open space and connectivity, and then the complementary uses. To get to the point that was brought up early, some other administrative changes are going to be included in this update, just based on what we think needs to be updated for the Virginia Village update to make sense. So that's the POA boundaries, that's making sure that aligns in every part of both plans, and that includes removing references to Virginia Village being part of the downtown small area plan. We are also updating out-of-date maps and references, so that includes adding some reference to large projects that have been done in the area. It's not going to be comprehensive, but it will at least give better context to the updated Virginia Village section. And then also resolving accessibility issues and updating some of the visuals in the plans, because I believe both of these plans were 2013 and 2014 respectively, and with this update, we are hoping to meet the accessibility standards that the whole city is pushing towards. With that, rather than go through every single update, as I think they will be addressed additionally in the zoning section of this meeting. I will open it up to any questions, comments. Thank you.
Questions or comments from the Planning Commission?
We discussed this at our last meeting, so I don't know if anybody has any updates based on changes staff has made or any additional questions. Happy to hear what questions council might have on the small area plan.
We appreciate you taking a first stab at it. Council, questions or comments on the small area plan draft changes?
No, I was just gonna say that they all are sort of, make sense to me. I was looking at the staff report. Whoops, I was looking at the staff report, and I don't know if this is necessarily pertaining directly to the small area plan, but I did note that, let's see, somewhere in the staff report, sorry, I've lost it now, but there was a mention of talking about, it's at lines 78 through 82, just talking about reaching out to the residents who are currently at living in Virginia Village, and just letting them know that we would have temporary housing, helping them with relocation, no cost to the resident, and options to return to their new unit with the similar AMI level. So I just wanted to note that to the community, because I think there's a little bit of misinformation out there. And so just that, we do have, and that's something we'll probably touch on later on. I know we still have to kind of put this housing relocation policy, make sure that's all buttoned up and in writing. But, I just wanted to make sure you put that out there, because there is some misinformation about how we are going to make sure that the current residents in Virginia Village are taken care of. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I guess I'll let staff chime in on the specific dates, but my understanding is there have been several opportunities to reach out to the current Virginia Village residents as recently as last Thursday, and then previously as well.
Yes, yeah, I believe at the bottom of the staff report it goes into the exact dates, but we have had 3 meetings just for Virginia Village residents where we have reached out to them through various means, putting flyers on their doors, email, word of mouth, and those have been open for just any discussion that they want to have. And we're hoping to continue some of that engagement as the process continues.
Thank you. Mary Beth?
All right. On page 32 of the small area plan, there's an addition about the stamped sidewalks. And there's just one word that's bothering me where it says, a second walking trail features stamped sidewalk stones, but it's really stamped concrete, not stones. So that's one little thing. But the other piece of this is, as we're thinking about the history, it is right next door to the Tinner Hill site, and I think that's important. And I just had a great chat with Ed Henderson as we left the walking tour, and he said Tinner Hill is fully in support of making sure that affordable housing gets into the site. So Tinner Hill is not feeling at all that they're going to be overwhelmed or shadowed or concerned about this. Ed Henderson is saying that, not the whole Tinner Hill board. But so that is one thing. The second thing is, I feel like there's another piece of history that is part of this site, and I'm wondering if there's a way that we can remember that this is 1941 housing, this is GI Bill, World War II housing. This is like the housing that made Falls Church what it is. So is there a way, as we're talking, and this is more RFP, but it ties into this history, is there a way to somehow ensure that we're going to commemorate that history? And that can be in existing homes that stay there. It can be some sort of plaque memorial, something, to be able to talk about the development of Falls Church as a city and the fact that in 1941, these houses were built and people started to come to Falls Church, and that's how we became a city. I feel like that little piece of history is even more likely to get lost than other pieces of history because it just is kind of there. So that is my history request. Someone asked about, is there a way to do, historical overlay districts related to that? And I don't think that's, because these were all built after 1910, so they don't fit into the HARB. But I do think there should be a way to save that history somehow, commemorate it, recognize it with whatever we're doing. And then the other piece on page 32 about the Quinn project is the Rolling Road Park. I didn't see that in here as the changes to the Rolling Road Park related to the Quinn project. I saw it in a couple different places, but it wasn't real specific. So I think that's important to mention. And that, I think that's the big ones here. The other things are things that you guys are all going to take care of or that we're just going to not look at right now. So those are my main questions about this SAP. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead.
Remembered something, jogged my memory. On page 59, where we talked about that, and I forget where we wound up at the Planning Commission about the retail, like ground floor, non-residential uses. I mean, the way it's worded now, when we're saying in 59 that any ground floor retail should be neighborhood serving, such as daycare. I mean, daycare is not really retail. I know this is, so, and I forget, we had this discussion, and I forget exactly where we wound up. I know we had some concerns about it. We're trying to maximize, maybe it was Commissioner Duncan who mentioned it. If we're trying to, normally, again, traditionally, right, we want ground floor retail in our mixed-use buildings to activate the street. But if we're trying to maximize housing units, maybe Virginia Village specifically is not a place where we would necessarily be as concerned about not having retail on the ground floor. And first of all, daycare is not retail. I know there was some talk about supportive institutional uses, community uses, but those are different. So I don't know if that wording needs to be massaged a little bit or more specific. And again, we had this discussion. I don't remember exactly where we wound up, but I thought it was generally in that we don't want to make it sound that we're necessarily encouraging ground floor retail in Virginia Village specifically. I know this is the wider, small area plan, but specifically there, since we're touching on that in this section.
Maybe we can just swap the word retail for commercial. Any ground floor commercial.
How
Yeah, I
about
think
any
it's all
ground-
residential.
How about any ground floor uses, if provided, should be neighborhood serving?
Uses, yeah, just something more
I
general.
mean, council okay with that? It is a shift in our thinking, though, so I want to note that, because in the past, we've demanded ground floor retail everywhere and anywhere. So I think we're hearing agreement to not necessarily require it on the ground floor in this area. So I wanted to note that for the significance of that.
Don't want to outlaw it, but we don't want to mandate it.
Okay. So I'm sure staff can take that feedback and wordsmith. Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question about neighborhood serving? Does that come with a particular legal designation for what that qualifies as, or is that up to interpretation of what goes?
That does not have a legal definition around it. The section specifically that this is in the proposed land use, and it is not tied to any specific future land use map designation.
It's a general approach, not a specific, like, nobody would have to approve that it's a neighborhood serving,
Yes, this is,
just directional information.
yeah, policy guidance.
All right, thanks.
And I think we had this discussion with a different parcel of land, the one behind Burke and Herbert, and I think when we were talking about it, we were talking about there's such a, we've had so many restaurants coming in, and so the idea was like we could bring in different types of commercial that are not restaurants. So I think maybe that was sort of getting to that too.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Other questions or comments? I think Mary Beth has one more.
I do have one more. Did everyone else get to go?
No one else has anything?
All right, this is a parcel consolidation question, which is page 59, also straddles over to our zoning conversation later. And that is, if we look at the land that we do not own, there are a lot of parcels in Virginia Village that could be combined into a single parcel. Some of the concerns I know that I've heard from neighbors is that how big and how much can be right there. But I'm wondering about with parcel consolidation, there are side setbacks. If someone wants to consolidate those parcels and get rid of the side setbacks, what would be the permitting process? Would they have to come back to council? Would that be a special exception or a special use? Or how do you build something that straddles those consolidated parcels? And is that one of the ways we can put some guardrails on this for the concerns about people that are doing things, that may be wanting to do things by right?
If it's not expressly in the zoning ordinance that certain relief is available through like a special use permit, then you'd have to follow the variance process, which goes through the BZA. And you have to demonstrate a hardship that you can't develop under the zoning as written. So it's a really rigorous test.
But it's just the BZA that makes that decision.
Yeah, the BZA grants variances to zoning regulations.
Have we contemplated putting a special use on consolidations in this property if they want to get rid of the side yards? Or is that too far?
We haven't, but I think we don't view side setbacks as going away simply because consolidation happened. It will impact the relationship between two lots, but I think everything around the perimeter would still be subject to the protections and requirements we put in. So from that respect, it didn't, in our minds, trigger a special or additional process because of the way the wording is currently structured to ensure those requirements are met, even with consolidation.
Other topics? So Laura brought up the tenant relocation policy, which I know was originally scheduled for tonight, and we're not getting to it till later in July. Could we talk to that?
So I would say this sort of broadly about tenant relocation is that the city policy is really implementing federal policy and state policy. And so we were doing a scan between the two, and the reason we pulled it from the agenda is we were trying to understand some of the language of our policy in reference to like the Virginia Department of Housing's policy, because they should track very closely, and there were some differences. So that's the reason it was pulled, and I would also submit to the council it's a fairly standard policy that every locality in our area follows, and developers generally are familiar with the same set of rules. So I don't think when it does come to you, there's going to be surprises associated with it. The city attorney's been looking at it. I don't know, Sally, if you wanted to add any of your thoughts, or Dana, who was participating as well, I think. Yeah. Hi, Dana.
That captured it for me. So, Dana, if you have anything.
Excuse me, very similar to other localities, Fairfax, Arlington, and the folks will be taken care of. And we'll be following a tenant payment amount that HUD sets that all localities use. So it's pretty standard.
That's good to hear. I guess where it matters, though, is the RFP references the tenant relocation policy, and I think given that that's not going to be done, and but we're going to issue the RFP, do we feel like the development community will be surprised by the final draft of it? It sounds like it's going to be standard with what most people are experienced to, but.
So we do need to handle that. One way to handle it would be to reference the Virginia Department of Housing's standard relocation policy, which does stand for all the things Dana just stood for, is that the tenants are, the point is that when public funds are used to either do significant maintenance activities or redevelopment of a property, the tenants are supported until the project is completed, and then they have the ability to get housing in that renovated or rebuilt project. There was a discussion with the council about schools, and so our policy does note that if the relocation is outside the city limits, following the school board's standard policy, they would be allowed to continue enrollment in the school system. We are still having conversations with the schools just to make sure our understanding of it is the same as theirs. And there is one point, if in that case of relocation outside the city, there is a question of transportation. And, my understanding is that the schools potentially would not be able to provide transportation, so that's something that we would need to think about in any relocation that's outside the city limits. I think that's kind of the main thing that. So we're going to work that important detail out, but I think the council maybe ought to be forewarned that transportation probably would be a problem in those instances, and we would work to try to make sure that if it was a relocation outside the city, that problem was minimized.
This was discussed, I think, the first draft with the Housing Commission last week, and I think they were comfortable that at the minimum, we should let them continue going to city schools, but transportation did not feel like a necessity in their opinion, and that was just for people, but that was the position. I don't know if council has a different take, but I guess I'm 2 agenda items ahead. So in the RFP, we would reference the minimum HUD or Virginia relocation policy until we get ours updated. Would we commit that anything that we do would be beyond that? Do we have authority for our relocation policy to be more generous than HUD or Virginia's?
I think the answer to that is most likely yes, to be more generous.
So that might be an expectation we set, at least if we are planning to finalize the RFP, that if we're not going to be able to finalize ours, we're going to point to Virginia and HUD's with the note that we may have additional provisions. that we'd
Correct.
update.
And it would depend to some degree about where the generosity is coming from, if it's coming from the
The school
public
part of it,
side
I think, right?
or the private side, but yes.
Yeah, and I guess the corollary to that is who pays for the relocation cost? Is that going to stay consistent?
So my expectation would be that we probably can't impose a greater cost on the property owner than is imposed through state and federal laws. But that's part of, I think what we need to do perhaps is kind of put a table together that shows kind of the federal, the state, and the city, and so that we can kind of see clearly where everything overlaps and where it deviates.
Okay.
There's a federal law called the McKinney-Vento Law, which relates to homeless students, where if a family becomes homeless in a jurisdiction and moves out of that jurisdiction, they are still entitled to attend their original schools. Now, these families wouldn't be becoming homeless, but it's along those same, they're entitled to attend and transportation must be provided in McKinney-Vento. I don't think this is the same situation, but I think it's something that needs to be looked at and analyzed.
So one thing that I would suggest might be important is to have the policy adopted, if it's not already, by the school board, so that we're, because the City of Falls Church can't create policy for that body.
Yes, Bob.
And just to confirm, as we accommodate relocation during the development, and then with the goal of moving folks back into Virginia Village in the long term, Virginia Village, the rents would be set based on a certain AMI. So in fact, confirming that somebody could leave at a lower market rate value and then come back and the rent would be increased. Is that, so they would actually come back to a higher rent than they left. Is that correct?
Do you want to speak to how that's addressed in the RFQ, Matt, or in the RFP?
So I think the language we use is income verification, which really should be happening on an annual basis once you're dealing with committed affordable units. And at that point, which is kind of a big distinction between market rate affordable, where at that scale, it's up to the actual owner of that unit and how they want to have that exchange happen. But once they are committed and there's a higher role for the city or other jurisdiction to play, there's an annual verification. And sometimes folks may retire, sometimes they might get a job promotion. A lot of different things have to be verified. So that's something that we're simply highlighting will have to happen every single year. And based on that analysis, we'll know what the situation is once it's time to move back in.
I think we just need to be aware that families will be moving out, and they will have a certain rent when they move out. When they move in, there will be there potentially could be a higher rent based on their AMI.
But I'm hearing that it would be based on their income test, so that they would not be paying more than 30%, which is the standard we apply for all committed affordable
Right,
units.
but it could
on their
still
income.
it still could go up based on the market rate that they're currently paying.
Which is, every year, the AMI levels are reset regionally, so periodically, yes, it is based on what the region's average median income is, so to that point, yes, you're correct.
But if someone lived in an apartment and was being very frugal and wasn't spending 30% of their income, if that's what you're referring to, if they were in an apartment and they were not spending 30% of their income,
Well,
just
my
for whatever
understanding is
reason.
some of these rents are very, very low.
Right.
Those rents potentially could go up when they come back.
It would go up for that individual because we would do that income verification test. So if they were being frugal and they were only spending 15% of their gross income on rent, when they move back in, we'd have to test to see what their 30%, what the rent would be, assuming it's 30% of their income.
Right. It's just reading the staff report again, options to return to a new unit in the completed redevelopment at a similar AMI level as they were previously upon required eligibility verification. So I think if they can verify, yeah, but I guess that's where it rubber hits the road there, if they can verify their.
This was also discussed in the Housing Commission, because I think we can understand from the individual's perspective, it might feel unfair, but to be fair for all the units and for all the people on the wait list that, could benefit from the unit, I think we have to apply that current policy uniformly. Okay, anything else? I know we've detoured onto RFP, but also the small area plan?
Can I detour us just a little bit in the same general vein? So the policies that we're talking about related to relocation, is this information being provided to not only the tenants of the buildings that the city owns, but also the privately owned buildings tenants? Or is there sort of going to be a second set of approaches and rules? I mean, the public outreach you've done so far has thrown a net out to include everybody. What's your impression of the owners of the buildings that we don't control in regards to this discussion?
So that is a question that periodically comes up when we have our Virginia Village renter meeting, resident meeting, in which I think we highlight that the prioritization that's embedded in the RFP will be to focus on residents of the city-owned properties. However, the next tier of prioritization are others that are on the site. And then looking at the wait list, and there's kind of like a tiered system. We go broader and broader in terms of the demand. But I think we've been very mindful to make sure that, if you live on the site today, no matter where you are, you're going to be in the top of that prioritization list. Again, based on income verification. But the top tier, if I were to say, and I'm speaking partly for housing, is set aside for the city-owned units where we have renters.
Okay, is your impression, Jack and Zoe, that the attendance at the meetings that we've had so far has included some folks from the buildings that are privately owned, or are we relying on the landlords of those buildings to pass the word down to their tenants?
We've had a mix of both the city-owned property residents and some of the privately owned property residents. We have, I believe the first meeting we had with the residents, we only distributed the flyers at the city-owned buildings, but the last two we've had, we made efforts to distribute as well as we could to all of the buildings in Virginia Village, and both in those meetings and through the larger community meetings, we've gotten engagement from, I think, a pretty fair mix of different properties, both city and
Okay.
privately owned.
I think y'all have obviously done a commendable job. You know, the meetings that we've all been to have been well attended and the information's been good. And in the category, though, of, you know, let's remember we are a small town. At some point, we should make it a priority to have a face-to-face with every tenant on the site of all 20 buildings so that nobody can say, well, I didn't know anything about this, because as recently as tonight, while we're taking the walking tour, they're like, who are those people wandering around in my backyard? And, you know, no matter how much you've gone to the effort to try to reach them, sometimes you literally have to stand at their door and just make sure that they're aware. It just seems like that's the fair thing to do, and it's the positive thing to do to help the whole project, whatever the project turns out to be, move forward at a good pace, not encumbered by folks who come in at the 11th hour and say, I don't know anything about this. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Well, based on this, I think we're all ready to move on to zoning. You can go back to the presentation, Zoe.
Okay, yeah, I'll pick it back up from here. And so the next couple slides are a breakdown of the components in the proposed zoning amendments. The Planning Commission had a work session on these at their meeting last week. And so since then, we've taken some of that feedback as well as the feedback we've received from the public since then. And so those tweaks have been noted in gray highlight. And so there's a couple of those, but I'll just run through the kind of pieces of the zoning ordinance, beginning with building scale and density transitions. And so the proposal includes am I on the right slide? Yeah. A 10-foot building step back above any portion of a building over 40 feet in height. And that's everywhere. And then also included here is that bulk plane idea of 45 degrees. So that it would start at the rear property line of the Gundry Drive addresses and go into the sky at a 45-degree angle. And so no development would be permitted above that height. And we've got other protections as well to preserve that transition and kind of neighborhood preservation idea going forward. So further in the building height realm, we've got a maximum building height of 7 stories. And so in addition to that, what's new here and highlighted in gray is a maximum building height of 4 stories or 40 feet within 150 feet of Gundry Drive properties. And so that was one of the markers we had on the walking tour. In 150 feet, we measured out from the Gundry Drive property line, puts you about on the south side of Shirley Street for reference. And so from the south side of Shirley Street on north to the Gundry Drive properties, the proposal includes a 4-story or 40-foot building maximum, along with the bulk plane and the building step back.
Jack, I'm going to stop you here just because we spent a lot of time during the walking tour on this. So if you were standing on the properties closest to Winter Hill, you could not go up to 7 stories until you essentially cross Shirley Street.
That's correct.
That is what that new addition means.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 4 stories, and then you can only go up to 7 once you get to 150 feet.
Correct, yeah. So the part of Shirley Street closest to South Maple, we measured out 150 feet, and that's where you would be allowed to go up to 7 stories as long as you're within the bulk plane realm. So it could factor out that if the bulk plane might, I don't think it does, but the bulk plane works with the building setbacks and maximum building heights to push the bulk of the intensity towards South Maple Avenue.
So this is the 70 foot at 150 feet, does the 10-foot building step back still apply?
Yeah, so any part of a building that's over 40 feet, you automatically have to step that back 10 feet. And so that's also part of the transition that happens within the district, where, next to privately owned residential properties. That's where that thinking comes from. So in addition to, those facing privately owned properties in other parts of the city that are outside of the district, so that step back would apply, again, above 40 feet.
So real fast, on this map, 305, if someone purchases 305 and wants to do their own development there.
Could we bring it up on the screen so we can all see it?
I think we have it towards the end of the presentation. Taya, maybe on slide 23.
Thank you.
Because I think we're talking, in my mind, I keep thinking about the property we own and then the property we don't own. So we can go through our whole process, and then next year, someone purchases 305 or wants to redevelop 305. Can they put a 70-foot tall building at just 305?
If they're under the bulk plane, then that would be permitted, as long as you're complying with everything, right? So all of the setbacks, all the step backs, and the bulk plane. The maximum height would be 7 stories.
Okay, so then 307, if it wasn't developed, would still be the original house with something that big, right? That could happen. Probably wouldn't actually fit to build a 7-story building on that little spot, but.
With the side yard setback.
With the side yard setback and everything else, but. So what prevents a 7-story building on one lot? Just the actual footprint couldn't accommodate it?
So I think that's one consideration, but there's also the 2 tests that need to be met in order to access that density under this zoning. And one is 50% of the units must be affordable, and the other is there must be a contribution to open space. So those are 2 standards in order to access higher density. I think in addition to the practical issues, I think also points to this being applicable only in a consolidation scenario. Would that be an accurate statement?
It would be, excuse me, and I think part of the thinking involved in establishing those kind of barriers of entry, if you will, is that we're mindful of the much more limited opportunities to kind of horizontally or even vertically expand today based on the underlying zoning, which is an option that's going to remain, and I think many people might find that interesting, rather than going through a much more burdensome process, likely involving consolidation, being limited with how much of a footprint there's left once the overlay district regulations apply. So all that's kind of building into the analysis right now.
That's helpful to think about, because as I think about the properties that we don't own, may own, could, whatever, the idea that they could just be hanging out there and someone could do something wacky, we have enough parameters that is not going to happen. This is what I'm asking you to say yes to.
Yes.
I think we all remember that news story from Fairfax where the person built had the little Cape Cod and then built the 3-story addition, right now. So I'm assuming that's kind of what you're getting at, yeah. But I think, and that's one of the things, and not to go down this rabbit hole right now, but I know that's one of the things with the by right, or especially trying to make sure there are these guide rails that, in the future years from now, when someone comes in and sells that 1 or 2 lots, if not to us, to a developer, that there's some sort of, something that makes sure that we don't end up with some crazy looking thing there, so.
And I think you'll see the progression of, not just as Jack mentioned, the 10-foot step back once you get to a certain building height, but also pushing those buildings that you just described further into the property and away from any existing quadplexes that may remain, because a lot of them may remain for quite some time. And that's a healthy thing. We actually do see opportunities and an interesting outlook on that property where it's kind of some old, some new. And that was part of the thinking in establishing those guardrails with that in mind, but also considering that everybody has a chance to potentially utilize that overlay district. So you know, when we say long-term full build-out, you know, how many decades into the future are we looking at?
Like, chime in there. I mean, I think this discussion really underscores the risk about allowing this all by right. I mean, how confident are we? I mean, you raised a lot of good points. I mean, it's really hard to think about every possible iteration that might happen. And there's only one Virginia Village, right? I mean, so how confident are we? Why would we not want to retain some more control through an SE process or some other process that's not by right? My opinion is that by right is very risky for an area of the city that, for as long as I've been here, which is only 15 years, I've heard about how important it is to serve this particular purpose, to retain and enhance the provision of affordable housing. You know, if something does go a little bit askew that was not anticipated, which frankly happens all the time, you know, with the best planners, with the best zoning, with the best consultants, I mean, sometimes things happen that weren't anticipated, but once it's by right, it's by right. And there's no second bite at the apple. So why not, you know, at least retain some control? If somehow, you know, there's some concern that that's going to stifle or curtail development, I mean, I know traditionally that's the critique, right? We need to, you know, open this up because otherwise no one's going to be interested. I just don't buy that. I think that if there's enough potential to, you know, you have to obviously have the incentive to go through a legislative process. You know, if there's enough incentive through density and other things, then developers factor that into their costs. And it just gives us a level of protection. And people hear that word and they think, okay, it's for the people that don't want anything to happen there or don't want density. But really, in this instance, that's not the case. It's really to ensure that we don't get, you know, what we don't want to see there. So that's, I mean, I mentioned it at the Planning Commission, and I was saying it again tonight. I think that, I don't know why we would do that here. I mean, I think, you know, T-zones, I mean, people have different opinions about it, but there are many areas of T-zones, relatively speaking, scattered around the city. If one site doesn't quite go what we intended, okay, there are others. There's only one of this, you know, the one overlay district, this is it. So, I don't know, I don't want to belabor it, but I think that it would be a very risky thing for us to do, and I don't see why we feel we need to do that. I mean, do we feel that no one's going to be interested unless they can do it by right? I just don't see that. Every type of significant development in the city has occurred through a legislative process. That's true throughout the region. I think developers are very familiar with that. They understand it. If our plans are clear, if our intents are, you know, and the RFP is clear, people go in with their eyes open and they understand that's part of it. I don't know. So I'll shut up, but that's I think it's a really crucial thing that we don't.
I mean,
How sure are we? That's all I can say. How confident are we we're going to get it right the first time in just a
Yeah.
few months of looking at it?
Well, you said that way better than I did. Thank you.
Well, I'll just, here we go down another.
The staff, do you have more comments on that one, or do you have?
Well, no, about I was just going to put forth that, you know, obviously we've received a lot of letters from the community talking about, you know, not doing things by right because we lose some control. But I will say just, we have, you know, two council members absent this evening, Mr. Agan and Ms. Flynn, and I know both of them expressed that they have feel nervous about having by right. So I'll just put that out there as well. Yeah, I think we all do. It's, you know, you do lose it's a very fine balance, right? You want to encourage development and this sort of thing, but on the other hand, you don't want to lose all control. So it's a fine balance for sure.
Other opinions?
What are the options? It's by right or special exception. Is there a middle ground? Special exception has a lot of things that would not apply to this site.
Part of the nuanced conversation here is that staff's analysis of what's currently on the site takes advantage and kind of builds upon previous efforts to kind of pursue the similar path when the MUR overlay district was created, which is another by right solution. It actually enabled a path, one that hasn't happened yet, and it had so many controls embedded into it that made it very difficult to execute, but one that had a much more drastic scale of density on that site. And I think we took that really to heart in terms of kind of learning some things about what makes zoning efforts like this more productive, more effective, what is the right transition, and I think that's where a lot of the sentiments and the community feedback helped us get to the place that we're at. But, and maybe I'm coming from a place where I've seen plenty of by right applications work just fine. It may be a new thing, it may be unorthodox, but I think if the right controls are in place, and I feel strongly we have the right controls in place, it can be used for good, and it doesn't always have to be something that's unpredictable. I also think because of the objectives, the affordable housing and the public open space, we are dealing with a very different dynamic than we would be elsewhere when it comes to commercial activity, where I think negotiations are absolutely critical and necessary, and we're dealing with much bigger projects than we might be seeing here. So to us, I think there was a lot of unique elements that separate Virginia Village from other entities, and we felt that given the history and given how much feedback we're able to kind of consolidate into very well-designed zoning language, that by right, I think actually could work very well here.
I think to add to that, I think this is a city that is used to having a lot of controls through the SE process, and I think we've also found that that works well on large parcels, developers who can afford an SE process. Frankly, it takes 2+ years plus lots of lawyers to go through all those hearings, and I think if we want to encourage smaller scale development, especially affordable housing, like they just have less deep pockets. And so I think going through an SE process just may not make sense. And I think when you think about having gone through 5 SEs now in the city, the things that we negotiate and ask for are exactly the things that we're debating now. What's the right setbacks? What are the uses? What are the ground floors? I mean, while we are worried about kind of the unknown potential, I think if we are serious about doing housing and doing affordable housing, I think this is a risk that, I think we should be willing to consider, especially because we are defining all those guardrails that we would be negotiating anyway in an SE process. And if this lowers the bar to kind of get some more creative options, especially in this ambitious time frame, the status quo is what got us here in the housing crisis in the region, right? Status quo of 2.5 years, cumbersome approvals, uncertainty whether you actually might get an approval or not is why people don't do projects in the region and why we have a housing shortage. So, sorry, I know Tim wanted to chime in.
Yeah, I think I would kind of echo the same thing. I mean, it's understandable that, of course, if you feel like you can still get the development that you need and have a more elaborate, hands-on control process, you, of course, want that. But as I think back in terms of the last 10 years where we've tried to apply the SE approach to smaller projects, typically they walked away. The developer just said, we cannot handle that. We don't have enough units there to do the cross-subsidy that's needed to make up for, what's required. So, I mean, it is risky. You have to be careful. You've got to get it, take the risk that you're going to get it right on the first step when you put the legislation in effect. But I don't know how you can get rid of that risk. I think that's just part of it. And, well, I'll leave it at that.
Dean?
I guess I'd also like to stress that from our previous discussion, it sounded like we have a lot more decision points. So even when we do put this out for, when we do put a project out for RFP and it comes back, there's still going to be a decision that the Planning Commission and City Council makes. And so it's not sort of, this suddenly falls out of our hands and there's no room for any sort of say or changes or additional tweaking. If we don't like a project when it comes back, we still have more decision points and more negotiation to do. So I see this a little bit different from, let's say, a Quinn project or a West Falls project. This is something where we do still have actually quite a bit of control. And so I see this more as actually a really good middle ground rather than just absolutely giving everything up.
So to build on that, it sounds like if we release the RFP, we will hear back, hopefully, proposals. Council, with the advice of the selection committee or advisory committee, whatever we're calling it now, would get to choose the proposal. We would then also go into an interim agreement and a comprehensive agreement, so additional decision points for council, as well as finalize the zoning. So if we do first reading next week, and then the final second reading would come after we get an interim agreement. So those are those additional points that I think Justine was referring to that we've talked about. Is that correct, Steph?
Yeah, that's the schedule that's the roadmap that we've laid out. And there's been some discussion about that. I remember some council members not liking that extra time after interim agreement for the zoning. the intent of the roadmap is for the public to be able to see the top, the public would be able to see the concept plans of the selected group and then consider the zoning in the context of that concept plan.
So to put it in a different way, and I know Mr. Agan was very firm on not liking, that we don't have the zoning buttoned up before the RFP, but just to put it in a different way, and Ms. Connolly and I were just talking about this tonight, that, by having that zoning all set, it could stifle like creativity, and it could, developers may not, if we leave it a little bit with some, understanding of this is, what we're thinking in terms of setbacks and all that, developers can come to us with, this is what we're thinking, but we have certain safeguards there that we've got the selection team, or I don't know what we're calling them, but this group of, representatives that are going to go through these, knowing what the council and what we've talked about tonight, what the community wants. And then we also have, the council has the final say. So there's also some safeguards in terms of even, so the RFP proposals come in, that sort of thing. Zoning isn't hammered out yet, but we've got, between the selection panel and the council, we have a ways to put our foot down if, So I don't know if I'm being clear, but I think that there are ways that we can make sure that these setbacks and step backs and all that, and what the community has wanted, that pretty much is what's followed.
Look, I'll give an example. So the 25-foot setback is something that's, we've gotten a lot of comment on that, and there's worries about that. And in the abstract, considering sort of a wall at 25 feet, that can, just sort of a building massing that then steps back, that can be one thing to think, well, that might not be very good in terms of adjacent properties. If, however, you actually have concepts in hand where you're considering the zoning for, from the RFQ, where that 25-foot setback is used for rear porches or sort of kind of human scale things, not a lot of massing that in fact actually breaks up the building, gives the building interest, makes it something you would even, like to be next to, that allows the council to consider the setbacks in the context of a concept. Now, that's for the properties that the city owns, and so the point then is applying this to the future for the properties that the city does not own, and that is worthy of consideration. I guess the thing I would offer for consideration, sort of with those two tests of either a public land contribution or an affordable housing contribution, there is still going to be, I think, public involvement in those scenarios. So the private sector is developing it, but they're trying to do something that is difficult and it's going to involve the city. And so I think there's still going to be opportunity, even in those private parcels, for there to be city involvement in the ultimate form of those buildings. But it is really important to think through in terms of how these rules apply to the private sector. Matt, when you all think about it in terms of the private properties, for the publicly owned properties, the city council is going to stay in the driver's seat throughout the process. And so I think you're going to get an outcome that you like. How about for the private property owners? How would you see these rules applying to them?
So we've tried to, if you look at I guess it would be the final page of the staff report for the code changes, where beyond all the other guardrails and requirements, we do actually preview what the review process might look like, and kind of those initial conceptual conversations, submissions that have to happen, visits to the Planning Commission. We try to be very clear about spelling that out because I think it is important to make sure that it is a process. It's not just a handful of people that have a say in it. And we are going to be relying on that feedback to kind of make sure that what we're seeing is meeting the guardrails that we are putting in. And that's kind of the big test for the zoning changes, because we have to think forward beyond just the lots that we own. How could, at some point, the rest of the property and then we've heard from the owners that they're interested in having that opportunity. Could they utilize the same parameters and at some point redevelop, however, and in whatever consolidated form that might look like?
So one question.
Where is that?
Go ahead.
So if you look at if we can pull up the staff report, it'll be at the very end where we have the blue,
Code, within the code.
yeah.
The very
Yeah,
last.
it'll be at the end of that, second to last page maybe. We'll get into the process. All right, maybe, yeah, there we go. We can blow up that last paragraph.
That's the zoning staff report. Sorry, Letty.
I think bottom line is by right is not a blank check to do whatever you want. There's still a site plan process, albeit it is different now under Virginia code, but.
Right, and what I believe often gets lost in even reading that or a flow chart is, we have dozens of staff representing an interdepartmental review team that still have to make sure any project filed on whether it's our lots or private lots that has to meet, a whole slew of requirements, and later on the building code. So there's a lot of eyes on this internally in terms of making sure we're treating this like any other project filed in the city. It's really kind of those initial kind of conceptual stages that we try to spell out, because those might be more ambiguous to some.
You, in terms of the zoning and the timing and all of this, I think that some of the council members would feel more comfortable if, and I don't know if this is a possibility, but doing perhaps a first reading of zoning next week and then and then doing the vote on the RFP after. Is that something that we could think about?
Are you referring to a sequence of agenda items for the same night?
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any problems with that.
I'm sorry?
I don't see any problem with that.
Okay. I mean, I'm trying to represent, we've got two council members who are not here this evening who are both abroad, and so that's why they're not attending virtually. But I think, I'm always trying to can we try to get as many people on board as possible? So I think if we were to do something like that, do a first reading on zoning and then after that do the vote on the RFP, I think that would make people feel more comfortable.
I'd like to have the confidence that we're in good shape too on the first reading.
Can I?
Sorry, the city attorney wanted to say something related to that.
Sure. I wanted to echo Wyatt's points about the privately owned units, and I wanted to just clarify that a special exception doesn't have to be evaluated by the criteria that are in our zoning ordinance. You could create special exception criteria that are specific to Virginia Village as part of this ordinance, something minor, something, and I don't know what that is right now, but that I just want you to know that's theoretically possible. So if there, the bare minimum process for a special exception, though, is, to the mayor's point, it is a public hearing in front of the Planning Commission and a public hearing in front of council. Each of those is advertised and voted on, by each body. So you can't avoid two public hearings, but the criteria can be what you make them. And so then the second, what was the second thing? Nope, that was it. Here's what I wanted to ask. It's more of a question. And that is, after we receive the proposals and we're seeing kind of the creative and graphic illustrations and some ideas, we would have a chance, correct me, Matt, if I'm wrong, to kind of check those ideas against the ordinance that we've drafted, and if there's, and just to make sure that they're tight and that they match. And then, so I think, if we need to repeat the first reading of the zoning ordinance to achieve that, I think that's possible too. So there is, but I want to just underscore this. Once you do adopt that zoning ordinance and it's approved, you do not have another checkpoint for the properties that are not owned by the EDA. There's no more control after that.
So One question on the MUR overlay that's already on the entire district. That currently, assuming you can consolidate minimum, I think it's 2 acres, it allows you to go 20 feet setback up to 75 feet in height by right. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that's been there since the 90s? And no one has taken that by right path. Seemingly, our new overlay seems like a higher bar, especially with the test of 1-to-1 affordable housing replacement, 50% affordable, and the open space requirement. That seems like a higher thing to achieve than the MUR overlay. So the angst about, oh my gosh, we're creating a by right option has existed for 30 years, and nobody has taken advantage of it because of various reasons, right? Nobody can build a super tall, skinny building on a 1/10 of an acre, probably. That's the reality of it. And so that might help to quell any angst about creating a new by right overlay.
There are also, I think what you were calling out earlier, they have to consolidate, right? If it's more than one lot, and that's a choice that we get to make as a community, is what's being proposed for these like 2, 3, or 4 lots, something that we want, or we can say no to that consolidation. Is that correct?
Who says no?
The planning commission, subdivisions, like we approve any subdivisions, right, as a planning commission, and usually when those come to us, that also the proposal for what's planned for those lots comes to us as well.
The process question is correct. However, I think there are very different criteria for approving a subdivision.
Right.
And
Okay.
that decision is more black and
Ministerial,
white
is it?
in terms of what's happening once the consolidation happens.
Yeah, it is I would use the word
ministerial.
ministerial, and I think that's right. The only criteria you can evaluate a subdivision against is the lot size requirements and the other subdivision requirements in the zoning ordinance, and not a land use decision.
Okay. I guess another check that we might sort of have those parking, the parking that is required, like they would need to provide, if somebody were to come and want to build like a much larger structure, they would need to provide parking for that in some way. I think that will be a challenge.
So has staff sort of gamed out like the remaining 9 lots that are individually owned? Like what would happen if 308, 307, 306, 305 are purchased? Or what if 305 is the only one not purchased and everything around it is? Then what happens to 305 if people are building, there's as large as possible? Have we looked at that at all? Like what, because that would help us with protection. This is almost like something that Letty would ask, like what's the worst case scenario?
I'm normally the worst case
Yes,
person.
exactly. So I'm going to channel Letty and just say, like, what is the worst case scenario for those individually owned lots? That is it 305 being orphaned there, or I don't know, 306 being orphaned, 306 Shirley, or
This is the game everybody loves to play.
right. This is have you done that? Have you thought about that? And do what you've put into zoning?
Mm-hmm.
Does that protect us from that worst case scenario? How does it, I hear some ways that it can protect us. I hear Brent saying we should protect ourselves more from a worst case scenario. So I'm just wondering about what that worst case scenario would be if you're an individual property owner or a renter at 305 Shirley.
Selfishly speaking, I've put in my 20 years experience of dealing with developers and land use attorneys into this and kind of turning on that evil switch where how would they manipulate this? What is the worst case scenario? And I think as Wyatt was mentioning, the very high bar for entry into this overlay district is already a turnoff in terms of why would I do this? A lot of times I think the by right scenario of just expanding what you have now is probably much more fruitful, less of a burden. If we're just figuring out, based on current ownership, the most likely scenario that you might get is if you look at the western edges of Shirley where we have 304, 306, 308, those are on the different ownerships. Somebody would have to, at the right price, try to consolidate that. Given what we just put in terms of restrictions, most likely that's going to be a townhouse form of development, if that's all you have to work with. The conversation gets a little bit grayer when we cross Shirley in between Shirley and Maple, but again, you would have to work with at least 5 different property owners. Maybe, no, it shouldn't be 6, but 4 or 5 property owners and land at a price that allows you to not just purchase them, but also meet the requirements, which are, that's a heavy lift. Our recent SC projects are not requiring you to do 50% of your building as affordable. So in some ways, we already out of the gates negotiated, our second round, thank you to the feedback, negotiated a much better affordable outcome than we have with SC projects, or for that matter, for public park space. How many SC projects have delivered a public park? So those are, I think, pretty critical milestones where this is when we're willing to entertain development that I think will have people reconsider whether or not they have enough parcels to really make things interesting. I don't think, just from a personal perspective, that's going to happen in the near future. I think a lot of folks are perfectly fine just continuing the way it is, particularly along Maple Avenue. We've had the least amount of contact from those units. And the ones that have, I think, have a much more longer-term schedule.
Sorry, clarifying question. For the non-city owned parcels, which ones have owners that are adjacent to each other or own contiguous parcels, if any?
There are at least 2 that own multiple lots,
Are they contiguous?
but not one I think is barely contiguous.
So that's important context, right? So anything that requires assembly, you would have to have multiple owners at the table, so getting people to agree to sell at the same time at the right price. And then for any project is also a pretty high bar. Again, likely why the MUR overlay from 30 years ago has not been used. Okay. Andrea?
Can we talk about the open space requirement? I just want to think about, like, I'm also trying to think about, like, how could somebody game this? So in that situation, like, if somebody took 308 through 300 and consolidated all of them, 50% of it would be a park, and the other 50% could be just market rate units. But then we would lose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times 4, 20 affordable units in that. So I guess, like, I'm questioning the need for the open space. I don't really understand it. I feel like we need to guarantee that we at least keep what we have today at Virginia Village, and I don't feel like the open space path achieves that, or could potentially be misused to not achieve it. So I'm just curious why that's still in there, or what benefit do you see of including that?
So 2 things come to mind as I answer that. One is, it's a reflection of this push-pull that we've had over the last several months, but also I think the balancing act that earlier small area plans were trying to capture, where no matter which document you look into, there's a kind of a trade-off between portions of the site could deliver housing, portions should be reserved for open space. There's, kind of acknowledgement of a big Chinese Park expansion. So it was clear that folks had both things in mind. And what we were mindful of is not to set the stage where only housing could occur without leaving the door open for open space opportunities, but kind of let that be the market driving it. I think if we're successful in our phase of work on the city-owned properties, we feel less conflicted about allowing open space in lieu of affordability because of how successful we could be with the city-owned lots. So I think that could get us past the issue of potentially some consolidation being in a position where delivering that open space, however big of an area that is still more feasible than delivering on-site affordability. But that is going to be a test of the market for each owner who is willing to ask that question if they've gotten to sizable enough consolidation.
Yeah, if I could just chime in. But isn't that, the real risk? I think when we're talking about what the worst case scenario is, and by right, it's probably not that we get too much density and affordable housing, is that we don't get enough, and that someone finds a way to, if we leave an option like that, if you leave an option for people to do market rate, they're going to do market rate. If you leave an option for someone to build townhouses in the city of Falls Church at market rate, they are going to build townhouses in the city of Falls Church at market rate. I just feel that the profit margin there is so enticing that someone will go for that. So if that's not what we want here, and I don't think it is, we have to be very careful. If we're going to allow by right and leave that in there, we have to be prepared for somebody to do it on the lots we don't own, which is just about half of this site. So it just calls into question why we would kind of cross our fingers, give it our best shot here in the next few months and see what happens. I just think it's very risky. I get it, but the idea about trying to, get it right and let the market do it, and that we think the SE barrier is like what's holding everything back, I just don't think that's the right approach here, because it is kind of a one-shot thing here, Virginia Village. So I don't know. I mean, I think that's the risk. We don't get enough. Not that we get kind of too much. If we get a 7-story little tower, that we probably get a lot of townhouses that sell for 1.4 million or something.
Couple things in there, if I can just briefly. Townhouses are currently what the market is delivering. They're the easiest, the most, reliable return on investment that you have on a property. And we've seen in the entire region folks foregoing additional density just because of that predictability factor. I think the way we have structured the language is far beyond just crossing our fingers, but rather I think testing what the market is delivering right now and kind of asking folks to, even if you are interested in townhomes, and maybe the rest of this property could become townhomes, but can you do that and still meet the affordability or open space requirements? And I don't think it's the worst thing in the world if portions of the site do become public open space, because that holds us true to the earlier guidance we received that was well documented, the small area plans. And I think we've been very clear that the purpose of this is not to squeeze as much density into the site, but rather have a more mixed environment, some new, some old, but also some open space. And I think this is how we get there. But it does leave the question of when does the open space get delivered? And I think that question becomes part of the equation for the privately owned properties.
So I heard Andrea say kind of, a little discomfort with the 50% open space and not having any preservation of the existing affordable. And then I'm hearing Matt that we're trying to balance against the input we've heard about importance of open space and housing. Where is council on this? Do we want to leave it as a 50% open space, or do we want to say 50% plus preserve the affordable that's there and make it an even higher bar?
That's tricky. One of the things we've also talked about with this site is that it is a mixed income development, not just affordable housing. So this $1.4 million townhouse creates that mixed income that we have talked about also wanting.
Right.
But it does eliminate affordability.
Yeah, and I mean, if we're wildly successful with the public portion of this project, right, there's 28-ish units, including 300 today, that would potentially be redeveloped into, we don't know the number, right? I think it would be really, and this is why it's like so tricky, because you have to get the RFP out, you have to get the proposals back, and then that's why I see a lot of value in actually giving us time to tweak the zoning at the end, because maybe we get these proposals back and we decide actually we don't really want the 50% open space in there. But if we're wildly successful with the public portion and we get 120 units, then I'm less concerned about the rest of the parcel redeveloping in a way that would provide either more affordable units or open space. But I don't know what that number is, right? Like, I don't know that any of us know what that is yet. Or like how tall. I'd love to see like a diagram of like, okay, what can you build where in the box? Where are the setbacks? Where does the 7-foot stories begin? And how many units potentially could that building be? And I know the proposals will probably have lots of other creative ideas. It might not just be like a big block of a building, but I want that information now when we're making these decisions. But I know we're giving ourselves time at the end to sort it out.
But that could be, just following up on that, an interesting and timely opportunity where, once we fast forward to August, let's say, and we have those ideas in front of us, and looking how the development community is interpreting the language we set for them might open up our eyes or kind of make us react to, okay, then we need to kind of tweak the open space requirement, because it seems like this is how the reactions might be from developers. And I think that's exactly how the schedule is set up, where we can all learn something from the responses and still have time to kind of readjust. And when I say readjust, more so for the privately owned properties, not so much ours, because that's really where I think the learning environment is what the scenarios of what ifs that could happen. I see a potential there for maybe some small discoveries.
But one of the things that, we did talk about was this mixed income. And one of the things that Mr. Egan actually brought to my attention is, what we often hear from the community that there's a support for workforce housing, so for our police officers and our teachers. But the way that if you look at, a starting teacher salary or starting police officer salary, that's really like 100%, you know, they're not going to be able to qualify for any of this because they're making too much money to, you know, and so that's where you think about townhouses or, you know, something like I just think to have, and we all talked about this, is yes, obviously we want everything, the affordable housing unit is the goal, but I think to have a little bit of some mixed income and different opportunities, whether there's some starter townhomes or that sort of thing, I think diversity of housing is always a win, in my opinion, but.
That's why we shouldn't villainize townhomes, market rate townhomes.
And I
Adding
think
supply at all levels helps affordability at all levels, so.
And I think that openness to various housing typologies is already in the RFP. I know we're bleeding into the next item. But at the same time, I think if you acknowledge the level of investment that has happened in the privately held units, I think we're already achieving a certain mixture of incomes because those units rent at a higher cost. And as we are regularly reminded, some folks have maintained those units. They look a lot different than some of the ones that are perhaps less occupiable. So I think there's already a kind of a diverse mixed income level, but this is back to the open space requirement. That's one way to get us back to the kind of the mixed income future outcome, as opposed to having just nothing but affordable units on that site.
Okay, so I think we've talked about the by right path, we've talked about the 2 tests to access the overlay, we've kind of detoured from the zoning presentation. Do we have any other comments on those 2 concepts before we get back to the zoning point so we can get through the rest of the, Bob?
Just to follow up on Mr. Krasner's point and this idea of a slimmed-down special exception process, is it possible to see what that process would look like and how much of a burden it would be? It does seem as though this discussion highlights the fact that there are a lot of unknown variables here with open space and things like that. And if there was some kind of sort of less onerous special SE process, maybe that's what we could all look at and see how difficult would it be? I mean, right now, it seems the conventional wisdom is that the SE process is pretty onerous for this type of development. But if there is such a process that could be slimmed down, it might be helpful for all of us to see something like that, what it would look like. I don't know if that would be too challenging to develop a draft.
I guess before we ask staff to come up with a whole new process, I'd want to see whether there's a majority who would want to do so, given that we're on a tight timeline as well.
I'm intrigued by that, but I really want to dig into all these guardrails that Matt is talking about that are in there that may
simulate kind of the SC discussion that
Right.
we're having already.
Right, exactly. So I feel like I didn't fully understand that. I would have read that much more closely before I got here, but we'll do so. So I am intrigued by that idea of a middle ground between by right and deep SE, but I don't know that such thing exists, and that's a lot of work to do in 4 days.
Well, it can be as simple as this isn't something we allow by special exception, and it has no criteria, nothing, or very high level criteria, and there is case law to support the idea that if the legislative body is granting the special exception as opposed to the BZA, that those standards don't need to exist. So you could say special exception, it goes to the Planning Commission, it goes to the council. You could possibly put timelines on the deliberation period. You could, eliminate voluntary concessions from the special exception process and just boil it down to a vote at council. It could be pretty minimal. We haven't fleshed it out, but by law, there's nothing that's required other than the 2 public hearings and a vote at the legislative body.
Other than the 2 votes and public hearings, what do we get in that process in terms of what we define that we don't get while we're doing all this work now?
I think the risk is you're kind of going backwards because it sounds like we wouldn't have the criteria that we're spending the last couple of months developing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's kind of, while it's fresh, we're documenting as much as we can, even with a few numbers maybe shifting slightly between now and next week or the second reading. I feel like this really captures the right mix of things that were really, really important to us, to the point where really once something is submitted, we're looking at maybe utilities and architecture. I'm trying to like think down like what's left that we haven't really covered in terms of the zoning. But if there are categories you feel like maybe are missing, we're happy to consider that.
I mean, the argument is that you would have a proposal in front of you, which is why we have second reading zoning, to kind of have the proposal and say, hey, does the zoning fit with what the proposal has? And so I'm still not seeing the real benefit of what an SC process would do, other than,
Well, it's for what we don't know. I mean, it's for the stuff we control, sure, but it's for the project that comes in that really is not what we anticipated, or there's something about the design that we find because of that particular site, the way it relates to what's around it, there's something about it that's not working. It gives you 2 public hearings. It gives the public a chance to weigh in. Doesn't mean they get a vote, but they get to weigh in. It gives the planning commission an opportunity to actually have some input and try to encourage certain things that you just don't get otherwise. I think there's a benefit to it. And I agree with our city attorney that a special exception does not have to be. Other jurisdictions in Northern Virginia have all manner of special exception, types for different types of uses for things, everything from gas stations and drive-through restaurants to larger, more complicated projects. And so you can have, as Fred was said, as complicated or as simple a set of criteria as you want. And you can leave as much discretion in there as you want. But it does provide the opportunity for the public hearing and for the review for for something that comes in and, we have some issue with the way it was designed. I mean, sometimes architecture is very important to our design director's point. I mean, and that can be very important. And that can make the difference in some ways in making a project great or just okay. And I don't see it as a huge impediment. That's my opinion, but I just don't see that it is. We have a small staff. We're very responsive to our applicants. I don't think people feel lost in a huge bureaucracy here. At least I haven't heard that, because given the personal attention they get. So I don't know. I think that it would provide an extra level of, and again, this is all going to be, we're going to see how things go. There's always an opportunity to change gears and make it by right if we get a couple projects and they seem to be, kind of set the tone and we think, what, we don't need it. But since we don't know yet, I don't know. I just feel like if we get a couple bad projects in there that were not exactly what we anticipated, it'll be too late. As soon as the ink's dry on the ordinance.
Justine, you have your hand up?
I guess I don't fully understand because, so if we get some proposals that we don't like, we don't have to move forward with them. And then we still have the zoning process as a negotiating lever to, we don't even have to, if we decide the zoning afterwards, then we don't even have to move forward with any of the projects that come forward to us. And so it really depends on whether or not we like anything that is proposed. And there's nothing holding us to accepting any of the projects that come forward out of this. That would at least be my understanding.
This is for the privately owned lots.
Okay, so specifically, the issue is the risk of 305 and other
Or any of the others.
properties.
It's
consolidating.
Nothing with the RFP or what might happen.
Okay, gotcha.
With the
Sorry.
city, but
Okay, so I see. And so then the concern would be if they were to come forward with a project, the special exception would give us the ability to have some more oversight over that project.
Again, I think that's dependent on the criteria that the SC process would establish. But I think as I go back to the concerns about the review process, that the last paragraph we have in the proposed language captures a lot of that. There are meetings, I think. There is going to be visibility on this. So I don't think it's as black and white where there's a black box and nobody gets to see the site plan. And I think I
Site
just
plan's
wanted to clarify
administrative.
that.
I mean, there's really no leverage to negotiate on site plan. I mean, let's just be transparent for the public. Site plan process is checking boxes. So let's not pretend, or for anyone who's listening, to know that a site plan process is literally checking boxes. The criteria are laid out, you meet it, check, and there's really you can ask nicely, you can ask for anything you want, but if it's something that's going to really a substantive change, there's no leverage. The city has zero leverage to require a developer to do anything more, not 1 inch more than what the bare minimum criteria standards are. So that's the issue. So the site plan, yeah, you're making sure they meet our bare minimum site plan requirements, but that's it. So, and so when it comes to the planning commission, we didn't have a lot of leeway before, but we certainly don't have any now. Now we get an advisory kind of, presentation, but ultimately, staff is again going through that exercise to check the boxes, and once they check off all the boxes, stamp, and that's it. So
Again, I feel pretty, assured that so far no one has taken the by right path in the MUR overlay because of the consolidation. Still seems like they would need to consolidate some kind because no project's going to pencil on a tiny parcel that we have today. And plus the 2 tests make it even a higher bar to achieve that by right path than the MUR today. So again, acknowledging that we are a city that really likes an SE process and really thinks that we're the best at negotiating and have leverage, does not seem that our history so far has shown us that people are going to take that path based on the guardrails that staff is establishing.
But our history with like T-zones does show that we build the box and they're going to go right into exactly what's there. So again, my concern is just the worst case scenario of we set these guardrails up and someone says, oh, I could do this, this, and this, and we haven't even thought about it. So
right, that's how you get townhouses that have their front door however many feet from the side of a parking garage. That's not a great design. If that had gone through an SE process, I'm not saying it would have been dramatically different, but maybe there would have been some design changes there that might have made it a better built environment when all was said and done, instead of crammed into the max like it was. So that's a good example of I always pick on that one. I know it's not always fair to pick on that one, but that's a great example of where you have front doors of these units that open directly to a parking garage. We would have never, probably, if that went through an SE process, I can't believe that we would have all supported that and said, that's a great thing, what you did. Good job. I wouldn't have said that. So anyhow, that's the risk. It's something like that. So that's, again, I agree entirely with what Councilmember Connolly just said.
I think what I wanted to highlight, I guess back to your point, is that our modeling is trying to get at the, air quotes, worst case scenario, but how would somebody utilize this? What are the impacts of that? And our modeling is going to continue, through this week, next week, through the summer, and we have that capacity in-house. I also do want to just clarify that some of the comments that arrive during the course of a project's review that critically change the outcome of that process, critically get us to a much better outcome and successful project, they come from staff. It's not just from an outside entity or commission. And I think I really value the feedback that our staff between the various departments provides and often pushes developers towards maybe where they first came in and started from. And that doesn't go away. That's still going to be there as well. And I think we also, through our transparent process, highlight and welcome feedback as well. That helps us and others that would be involved in site plan reviews as we go through the approval authority later this year.
This might be a good time for if we could actually invite our consultant at the table, because I think we've been discussing a lot about what we think the real estate market might respond or how they might respond to the overlay. I feel like we've hired JL to join us, and so if maybe this is actually a good time to invite Mr. Finale to the table and tell us what the market might think about the overlay and what the worst case scenario might be. How might you maximize your profit if you were a private, non-city owned quad? Sorry to put you on the spot. Welcome.
Thank you, everybody, for having me tonight. Just, again, I'm Nick Finelli. I'm with JLL, with our Public Institutions Practice Group, and we work with municipalities like yourselves across the country, helping cities utilize their real estate to further their organizational goals and missions. So this one is a great topic, the preservation of affordable housing, and happy to be here to work with you. It's an interesting question, and I think, what it boils down to, it's really the size of the sites we're talking about, the affordability levels that you've set forth within the guidelines that Matt was highlighting. I feel like you're gonna, just based on the numbers alone, a lot of these projects are probably gonna skew more affordable than market rate to begin with, just because of, the different tools in the toolbox that you'll have from a financing perspective. When you only have so many market rate units and you've got to provide so many affordable units, at some point that mixed income level, it actually becomes easier to finance the affordable piece. So it'll be an interesting exercise to go through the responses once we do see them, given the size constraints that we have with these parcels.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's helpful.
And you're talking about the city-owned quads. What about the non-city-owned quads?
I'm talking about both.
Both, okay.
I'm talking about both.
Okay. So again, we.
So here's just one request. And this is just like a belt and suspenders, because I know Mr. Flynn or Ms. Flynn and Mr. Egan are not here and probably have similar concerns. Is there a way we can put an SE into the first reading and then really dig into it and then decide if we can take it out for the second reading, or is that a bad idea? We wouldn't be adding it later, we'd be kind of laying it out there as something to explore between first and second.
So I will chime in to say that I think if you either start without the SE and add it, or start with the SE and remove it, that both of those are probably substantial changes that would trigger a new first reading.
Would it be a terrible thing to have a new first reading on the zoning? How badly would that mess up our timeline?
I think that the test of that is going to be when you have the proposals that are come back and you see what is being, the concepts under the rules that you've approved at first reading, and then you'll have more information to assess, do we like the rules as we've determined them? And at that point, you will either say, no, they were good, we're ready to go on second reading, or you'll say, no, we need to make substantive changes to them. Then we would start over at first reading, and that's manageable. It's not ideal, but it is manageable. Like, the process has to accommodate that potential decision point.
So now we're back on the city-owned quads and RFP, the RFP responses.
Wait.
Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm talking about the zoning. If we put into the zoning, when we do first reading next week, an SE requirement, and then we dig into that more deeply and get the results from our RFP, then that will help us decide if we want to keep an SE in there or if it's unnecessary.
Well, again, for the city-owned quads, we can just turn down the proposals we get if we don't like them.
Right.
So you don't really need the protection or the safety net of an SE process.
Yeah, so it would be more for, I think, for the privately owned ones.
Yeah, what I was arguing is you'll get information because it'll expand your imagination of what could happen on the privately owned parcels. Now, so the other thing that we will also have more information on, and Jones Lang LaSalle will help us, I think, might be adding some more scope right here as we speak, but to assess that 50% rule. So the Planning Commission had a lot of commentary on it. It was a 12% affordability rule for the privately owned parcels. We talked about that internally. It became a replacement rule. And then it became a replacement or 50%, whichever is greater. So there's a 50% sort of minimum threshold, or replacement is really for a smaller infill development. The 50% rule is meant for a larger consolidated redevelopment. And so part of our thinking on that is that's a significant affordable housing contribution. In our experience, the market can't provide that. So that means public dollars are going to be involved. And with public dollars, once again, now the city council is in control. That was the thought process. But the whole reason for this is to have good back and forth on on these ideas, thinking through how they're going to work in the real world. But that's the idea behind it.
I guess to go back to the worst case scenario, like what is the worst case scenario that we're worried about? That one of these parcels turns into 4 townhomes with 4 of them all being affordable because it's 1-for-1 replacement, or 8 2-over-2s with half of them being affordable?
And I
That's
think,
really all that I think would pencil in this market if you don't consolidate parcels, right?
I think the orphan parcel is another worst-case scenario.
Like a Betos.
Right, that someone's left owning the parcel that is surrounded by tall development.
And you could frame the worst-case scenario a little bit more generically in that the buy right option, there's a lot of smart people in this world, and real estate developers are very intelligent people. They think through these things, and they will come up with ideas that we have not thought of. And if that's, to me, that's just the nature of this. That's the nature of a buy right development. So the argument for living with that risk is the concern about the costs that an SE or some version of that imposes on a project. I would argue that's kind of the main reason we're not proposing that, but there are risks associated with it.
Just to add to that, to your point, Mr. Manager, I think, in your worst case scenario, you have one parcel, we're talking a 2/2 with, a 1-for-1 replacement, or, 2 2/2s with, half affordable, half market rate. That's not a big budget. The SE would probably get you at a point where folks just aren't even going to consider the application process just because of the cost and the time. I think that's right.
I was about to say, like, for that kind of small project, no developer is going to go through an SE process, even if it's a public hearing.
Well, how about if there's lot consolidation, there needs to be an SE or something, like, if we're talking about one lot, that is a very small project. If it's 4 lots, it's a much bigger project. Can we require an SE with that?
Some sort of a threshold.
Right.
But right now, people, again, can build 75 feet tall with only a 20-foot setback with lot consolidation, and nobody has done it.
I mean, one thing that's important about the MUR is that it requires a 70% commercial component and a 30% residential. And I think the understanding has been that's why it hasn't been built. There's been no the most commercial SC that has ever been proposed is 30% commercial.
So if they do assemble, let's say, that, several lots, then we get something more dense, and then half of it's affordable. Like, is that a terrible outcome on a buy right process? It contributes to the policy goals we've espoused for the area. Or you get 50% open space.
That sounds amazing.
Right?
Right. That sounds amazing.
If people could assemble enough for.
Right. I just think there's too many open spaces on the game board that leave us with too many odd possibilities, as White said, that we haven't thought of, but that someone else will think of, where we'll go, what, oh, we didn't think of that one. So that really is my concern. And if we had more of the properties under control, I wouldn't have that much of a concern, but there's just that big chunk that is still out there, and we just don't know what's going to happen with it. And that's why I feel like more guardrails could be appropriate at this point, and maybe not in 5 years, but at this point.
I mean, I think hopefully the signal that this overlay and this process is signaling to the non-city-owned quads is we're pretty serious about doing something. And now would be a really great time to join in, because the bar to do something by right is a pretty high bar, right? And to do something on your own without the overlay is also pretty tough unless you consolidate. And so
That's what the mayor says. What does JLL say to that? What can we do to incentivize the private developer, the private owners, to sell into this project?
It's a pretty loaded question, but I think it's an interesting thing that we could certainly study, understanding, taking a more holistic approach. I mean, if you're able to get site control over everything, I mean, that's one avenue. The other is, I think, what your staff has laid out, right? Which is
We've gone from Mr. Kavinsky's question last week, which was at 12%, to 50% because staff thinks that's a good idea. I think it's a good idea too. If we go to 75%, does that make the private owners think, we're gonna get into this, and that would resolve Ms. Conley's issue, because the more units you can include in the city plan, the more guardrails, the more your guardrails do what you want them to do, the more you protect the interests of the Winter Hill folks, and the more affordable units you provide. So everybody's happy.
Yeah, and at that point, it comes down to goals and objectives, right? And if the goal is the preservation and creation of attainable housing, right?
I thought that's what we were here for.
Right.
I thought that that's what we've been trying to do for 20 years. I mean, Mr. Snyder and I have, maybe a couple others in the room, remember, our effort in the way back to do an affordable housing development in this general area, and we worked at it for 4 or 5 years and came to the end of the day, and it didn't fly because of financing. I mean, that's at least why I'm interested in what everybody has to say, and would like to get 4 votes on council to get us to move forward, not make a decisive, final, all-time decision right here, right now, today, but to make a decision, an interim decision that would then be better informed by what the market has to suggest to us later in the summer. I'm trying to find something to say to win the hearts and minds of 4 people on council, and I sort of, come up short, I guess, except to say that, do you want to spend your time and city staff's time for multiple years and get to the point where whatever you've come up with can't be financed for whatever reason, or do you want to take a chance to try something different this time and have a process that hopefully gives us an earlier opportunity to get the LIHTC financing to do whatever it is we were going to do? I thought that that's the whole purpose of this concurrent process that we're trying to move through.
I think to just back to your point about affordability levels, I think it'll be interesting to see, given the threshold that's been set at the 50% with the 1-for-1 replacement, or the 50% open space threshold, we may see more proposals at higher affordability levels because of that threshold. So to your point about LIHTC financing and other tools that make the financing of affordable and attainable housing a little bit, I don't want to say easier to pencil, because it's hard to do affordable housing. We all know that. But when you layer in the market rate, at some point the subsidy doesn't pay out, right? There's a break point there. That's something we can certainly test as we're looking at what these proposals come back to us looking like. And I'd be curious to see. I think we might see more affordability than that 50% level.
I hear all those words, and they are English words. And I conceptually understand and am hopeful about what you just said, but I would like to leave it into the hands of, staff and our experienced city council members who have already put a lot of effort into this, and get us to the point where your curiosity could be entertained, preferably before, Labor Day.
Sure.
I mean, you all have to decide what community means. Community means a lot of things to a lot of people. You have to be responsive to the people who live in and near this property. I get that, we all want to do that. But you also should, for the future sake of the city, need to be mindful of the community that we hope to build, which includes more people who are of modest incomes. And this is, as everybody seems to agree this time around, the place to do it. So pull out whatever stop you can, impose whatever percentage you want to try to get that number as high as you can. And if you end up with something that is just ghastly and horrifying, then council, as Ms. Underhill has said, has the opportunity to say, guess not. That's not what we really had in mind, and we're going to start all over again. That is an alternative. But at least first try the alternative that we've gone partway down the road and see what it yields.
Right. I think, no, I agree with you, Mr. Duncan. I think it's more of, not so much the RFP, I think it's more of these private, to me, I think where some of the council members, I'm speaking for people who may not be here this evening, but for the private ones that are owned separate from this RFP process, and whether those are by right or if we're going to leave some room for negotiation. But I do agree with what you've been saying and the mayor's been saying about, and I get that it's, you know, if it's just one or two parcels, why would a developer go through the whole special, like that's a lot to go through for a very small development. So I get that piece too. And, you know, so I don't know, I think maybe if we can just land on some, you know, setback numbers that people feel comfortable with for by right for the private owned ones, maybe that would just solve the issue. So, but like again, I don't think the issue is so much because we do have, and Ms. Underhill has her hand raised, but we have some safety nets right now. We've got this selection panel, and then we've also got city council able to say no with the RFP, but the private owned ones a year or two down the road. That's I think what the sticking point is with some council members.
I think the question is, you know, for the non-city owned quads, with the zoning rules of the setbacks, height restrictions, the two tests, what are they likely to do with it?
Townhomes. I'm just going to say it.
Townhomes. And so on one parcel, how many townhomes could you fit? And what would be the outcome? Instead of a quad, you'd fit in 4, 3?
It's possible depending on how you're reoriented. I think what we have to remind ourselves on, if we kind of move away from the city-owned lots, what's left between Shirley, I'm cheating on the map, thank you.
Can we bring up the map again, please?
I mean, it's already in my brain now, but that is not an efficient building footprint potential. If anybody was to consolidate and acquire everything between Shirley and Maple, it's not conducive to an efficient parking garage, everything else we're putting on this. If people come in and they realize how much they require for point of entry, I think we're going to see more townhomes than multifamily buildings.
And the townhomes would still either have to meet the open space test or the 50% one-for-one test.
Correct.
And so again, if we get 4 townhomes on a lot and 4 of them are all affordable, that's not a terrible outcome, right? Or 2 of them are affordable, especially if we talk about mixed income. Is there any other worst-case scenario, I guess, so that we can at least, I'd like to put to bed so we can get to the other zoning questions and zoning topics that Zoe's laid out for us. I'd like to put to bed the discussion of do we want to entertain an SC process or not? Because I'd like to see whether there's a majority who would want staff to go through that process and outlining what it looks like, or can we move on to the other zoning changes? Because I think those are also important guardrails to keep in mind for the non-city owned quads. What other, sorry, Justine, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I guess I would like to move on to some of the other topics. So, I mean, one thing I'm wondering is this something that we absolutely need to decide right now? Can we think through the worst case scenarios? And then let's say, I don't know, later on we decide hey, there's too much, I guess, leeway with these worst case scenarios. We want to have a much more strict policy here. We want to move forward with the SE. We can do, I mean, what I heard earlier is that we could do a first reading at another point if we decide hey, this is problematic. So can we punt this to another time after we've had time to think through the worst case scenarios?
I think what would be helpful for staff, if there are anxieties that are requiring the SE process to resurface, it would help us in drafting any further changes to the zoning language, a specific category or aspect of development that we think maybe needs to be codified so this could remain by right. And the reason I keep coming back to this, the staff keeps coming back to it, is that development is already so expensive. For us to be able to achieve our affordability goals and open space goals, it is going to be a by right solution. People are going to be walking away if they have to go through an SC process. And if we step back even further, it's something we're seeing at a Commonwealth level. This is more and more jurisdictions and states are basically indicating for housing production, we need to get out of the way. We need to have controls in place, but you can see what kind of the forces from Richmond are beginning to indicate in terms of certain uses currently, which have a much easier path now to deliver affordable housing, and other entities, or if you're closer to Metro, same thing they're doing with parking. This is the kind of pattern that we're beginning to see. Not that this is reacting to that, but I think they're recognizing how difficult it is to deliver affordable housing, and they're trying to see what levers can we adjust to make that more realistic. So additional categories would help us, and we can draft that language.
So if we think it's going to be townhouses, does it have to be 70 feet? I guess that's if we're saying we want to have the density on Maple Avenue and we want to have the height on Maple Avenue, but we think people are going to put in townhouses, if it's not, then it's 45 feet, right?
Well, we have to access, the city-owned parcels have to access the overlay as well.
Oh, true. Okay, so that's why, okay.
I mean, one filter we're going to apply this week, and we've applied it before, but returning to it might help as well, is kind of figuring out, are there aspects of the code changes that maybe need to be subdivided for a townhouse scenario, and in that case, here's what you're obligated to do, and for a multifamily, the kind of 6 to 7 story scenario, and here's what then would get triggered. Sometimes that's kind of helpful as well, just to kind of distinguish.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful to be able to say this is the townhouse portion and this is the multifamily portion. That.
It's kind of like if this, then that approach.
That helps me.
Before I get to Justine's hand, I guess, am I hearing that, like, if we introduce the concept of an SE process, would we scare away potential responses on the RFP? If we tell them that, hey, you bid on this, but there's still an SE process ahead of you, even a slimmed down version, what does that do to development community knowing that they have 3 months of hearings ahead of them?
Yeah, it adds to the cost, it adds to the timeline, and sure, it might scare some folks away. I think that's absolutely right.
And in the spirit of trying to get the most creative options that we want and as many proposals as we want, I'm pretty wary of that, especially if we, again, are outlining all the guardrails already in what would be typically an SE process. And if there are additional ones we need to tell Matt about that we haven't talked about, then we should give them to him early, and we can put it in the zoning language without having to use an SE process to do that.
And this is where I'm relying on staff to tell me what the guardrails are, because I don't know what they are. You do. And you've shared them all with us, but are there any others? Or this is it. These are the best ones that we have. The bar of entry, the 2 tests, the
setbacks, the height, the setbacks.
Vegetation is one I think we're continually exploring.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like? Playing out scenarios of what could remain there for quite some time versus what could redevelop. Right now, I think the regulations are subdivided based on the more sensitive edges, so Winter Hill and Big Chimneys Park. There may be others. So that's one example. Even an example of a successful outcome that you may have experienced or walked by and kind of pointing that to us, we can take a look at what may have led to that, test that with our regulations. Could that yield the same outcome? What would be missing? Okay, and we can kind of reverse engineer that, kind of put less pressure on you to give us the exact language, but those outcomes are very helpful. And we've heard some of them already from others. So.
Justine, you had your hand up earlier, and now it's not. Do you still have a question or comment?
Some of it was answered. I guess the only other thing I would have to say is I'm actually on a separate project. I'm working on a video where I'm actually trying to build some affordable housing on paper in the city of Falls Church. And I actually calculated out, what the process of going through all the city reviews and going through what it would take to dump through an SE process. And it does add cost. So I guess what I'd like to challenge is to recognize is that the costs that we add make it that much more difficult for something to pencil. And so when something becomes that much more difficult to pencil, we get less of what we want. And so it makes it more difficult to get the open space that we're looking for. It makes it more difficult to get the affordable housing, or we are giving something up when we add on all these other processes. So from my perspective, I would prefer not to rely on the SC process right now, but I'd definitely like to make sure that, we do go through the exercise of the worst case scenarios and that we are comfortable with what could come out of it.
Okay, so to wrap up this portion of the discussion, I guess I would say, what do we get out of an SE process that we don't get today? And that would be helpful feedback to staff, that we can add extra suspenders and controls or whatever we want to call them. Okay, so let's get back to the other zoning. I think we started with setbacks, the 25 feet, and then the new addition where you can't, you have to be set back 150 feet before you can go up to the full 7 stories. And one note for staff, actually in the staff report, I think it's like lines 280 to 282, it actually says 75 feet back from Gundry. I mentioned it to Matt earlier, so as opposed to 150 feet back, so there's just a typo, I think, or maybe an earlier iteration. But I think we're all comfortable with 150 feet, especially seeing it, I think, in person. You really have to go all the way across Shirley before you can go up to 7 stories. That feels like a lot of room from the property line at Winter Hill. So thank you for listening to the community on that and making that adjustment. Is there anything else on this slide before we move on to other zoning elements? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no.
I guess,
Or Dave.
I guess we've had this discussion and generally moving toward a by right approach, which makes the guardrails terribly significant. And I'm not seeing the guardrails, all the guardrails there that I think are essential to making this a win-win project. I think 7 stories goes at least 1 story too high. I think the 4 stories ought to be 3 stories, and I think the setback ought to be 40 feet. If you did that, then I think you'd have a win-win. If we're not going to go that way, then I think, in my view, we have a serious problem. One of the things that we've done well in the city of Falls Church, and I'm thinking about Winter Hill, is how the affordable housing maintained by the Falls Church Housing Corporation that I had the honor to chair at one point fits in so well with the community, and that's fundamental. And so I'm concerned with the guardrails aren't right, and since we're going with a by right approach, it's critically important to have those guardrails in place. And all the talk about, well, you know, we might not like what we see, and it's an RFP and whatever. Keep in mind the RFP has criteria, and we'll be rating based upon meeting that criteria. If we don't set the criteria right, there could be a very good argument that has to be agreed to. So I don't think the guardrails are right. I've outlined what I think would make them right, would truly be a win-win, and still add significant for affordable housing. Because as I looked at the housing that's there today, I looked at the backyards, for example, are far more than 40 feet. So we're adding a lot of developable space, even up against Winter Hill at a 40-foot setback. Not to mention the developable square footage that we're adding, both backing up to the tax analyst building and backing up to the Bowl America. So I think the criteria ought to be how much we're adding and how we're doing it, consistent with the views of the surrounding neighborhood, rather than setting some very, very high number and then arguing against that. I think we ought to see what we can do to add significant affordable housing, and I think we can do it, and do it in a way that's the community, the immediate surrounding community has indicated that they can live with, which is a pretty significant and substantial development in that area compared to what's there now. And maybe that's the way we ought to look at it. So anyway, my focus from the beginning is the guardrails. It's the outcome. I want a win-win, and we're not quite there yet, in my opinion. Thanks.
Any other opinions? I think, Tim?
I did express some concerns about the 7 stories, and that was just based on Pearson Square is kind of alternates between 4 and 5 stories. Tax analyst is 4, 4.5. And the Virginia Village plot itself is actually on higher ground, so you know a 7-story there is going to stand even higher. So I kind of came down for the moment on the side of 6 stories. So.
Okay. Anyone else?
I also agree with the 6. I mean, it wasn't my main issue tonight, but I agree with 6 seems a better fit. You know, and if not, then I think you do need a bigger setback from the Gundry properties if you're going to go to 7. But I think 6 is probably a better fit. I appreciate staff's looking at the bulk plane, comparing it to Rollins and whatever that is, South Virginia, but those homes are set back much further away from their respective rear lot line, and the Gundry properties are as close as 5 or 6 feet. So it's a much greater impact. So I think that, anyhow, so I agree with that. But with 6, if we were taking a straw poll, I think the 6 is a better fit.
Yes, I was going to say, there's not 7 up against Gundry.
I understand that. I understand that. But just the shadows and other things, from that, just because of how close they are to the property line, the separation, and the change in grade, which we didn't really get into that, but that was just mentioned. And, yeah.
Not everyone voted for it, but I know Quinn's at 10. So if we're talking about context of that neighborhood.
So here we're talking about 202-468 up against the bowling alley and whatever we have or can get a hold of up against Winter Hill. Is that right?
Could you bring up the map again?
So do I get 6 stories up against the bowling alley without a step down? If I give you 35 feet of...
There's a 15-foot setback there, correct?
Okay, so I get a 15, against the bowling alley, I get 15 feet and a 6 stories.
Plus a step back.
Plus the
No,
step
so
back,
without a
a
step
10-foot
back.
step back, and then, I'll let staff answer.
Bowling alley, I'm getting the step back. Why are we stepping back against the bowling alley? It's a bowling alley.
That's the rule.
Part of that, I think, gets into what I would consider the most difficult part of the analysis, which we're establishing code language for existing conditions and what could be in the future. At some point, if Bowl America were to redevelop, what could that site look like? Would we want to have a nice, tall, 6-story building, or would we want to start to introduce some light and air into whatever that space might be between the 2 future buildings? I think in general practice, it's a good thing to have step backs at some point, depending on where you are. That might be 3 stories, maybe it's 2, given the pedestrian environment you're trying to solve for. But we also wanted to kind of use that as a barometer for, we're allowing buildings closer to that lot line, Bowl America and Tax Analyst, but we're going to still have that 10-foot kind of protection, which between the 2 create its own kind of bulk plane angle, but it's much steeper.
So 4 steps down to 4, is that what you're
4 to 6, yeah.
selling? And is 35 feet acceptable? In reading letters from the neighborhood, I see 40, but 35 I could live with. I could certainly live with 35. How about you all?
I guess I kind of want to go back to the height question about 6 versus 7 stories. And so in my mind, having a range provides for that flexibility. So I guess staff has told us in the past, and this is probably where it's helpful to have JLL at the table, is that the sweet spot of financing affordable projects is around 100, 120 units or so. And given the constraints of where the setbacks, step backs, the various parcels that we own and don't own, by allowing 7 stories and signaling that we want that height and density to be closest to Maple, that allows you to actually remove the massing away from Winter Hill while making the project financeable. And so I guess I'd be wary of capping it at 6 without knowing whether that then constrains a project to actually be built and financed down the road.
I should have prefaced my remarks by saying exactly that. However, I would like to get Dave Snyder's vote, so I'm responsive to a belief that, 6 stories is, you could get all those things that you want, that we want, and still do it within a 6-story building. If the market were told to do that, could the market deliver those things and pick a number of affordable units, 100, 120?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's that 100 to 120 sweet spot, and depending on the unit yield, unit sizes, right? Then, if we're condensing the height, that may yield a smaller unit, average size, which, gets into the question of, are these affordable units designed for family living, or is it going to be, 1 and 2 bedrooms? And that again comes back to the question of, goals and objectives. And if we're looking for family housing, then maybe the 7 is the answer.
Which we have said as well, and we've heard from the community that people wanted larger bedroom counts for more family affordable units. So that's been a goal that we've had.
Yeah, well, I share that goal too. That's what the housing people tell us. And certainly, again, if we're building community, we want to try to build in larger units with families as part of the mix, more part of the mix than they have been in the affordables that we've been able to put in the mixed-use buildings. But I also still want 4 votes.
Let me just reiterate that I think the successful project is one which listens to the community and deals with what they feel is important as long as it's reasonable, and it is. And at the same time, they're agreeing to a significant increase in density in that site that adjoins their neighborhood. So I think it should be 6 stories. I think it should be 3 stories adjoining the Winter Hill. And I think it should be a minimum 40-foot setback. And when you do that, you're still allowing a significant amount of additional density that you don't have now in terms of affordable housing.
Well, to me, this is why we've got to ask the market, and we have to give the market enough latitude to get some responses. If the market comes back and says, well, that's ridiculous, you people, we can't possibly provide multi-bedroom units at 6 and 3 stories. Or if the market says, yeah, we can work with that, but we need 30 feet, not 35, then, we have something to talk about. But just decreeing that, what you and I might agree on without any knowledge of what the market's likely to provide, I don't know. It's an interesting exercise, but it keeps you up here till midnight for the next 5 months, and you may not end up with a final product in the end. And you certainly will miss the LIHTC funding round this time.
So regarding 6 or 7, I would very much like to have the Heights near Maple Avenue. I think I've heard others say 6 should be the top. I think if it's a height near Maple Avenue, I could be okay with 7 if it's stepping down as we get down to 206, 208. But the Maple Avenue side is 7, and then we step down to 654. I would like to see 35 feet as a setback backing up to Winter Hill. I don't think it has to be 40. A lot of the neighbors have said 35 is acceptable. Maybe that's where a special exception could come in. If someone wants to go to 25, they could ask for a special exception to put a 1-story den on the back or something. I don't know. So I would be okay with 6 to 7, as long as that density is concentrated towards Maple Avenue and a 35-foot setback by Winter Hill. I think that answers a lot of the concerns that we've heard.
And I would second that. I think, the density along Maple, and, one of the sort of concerns I have is that when you're looking at 208, which, butts up to the park, I'd rather it not be sort of you're walking down this tunnel to Big Chimney. So I think if you can have it be, taller, 7 stories, and then it tapers down as you get closer to Big Chimney, so that we've still got kind of an open, entree onto Big Chimney. I think that helps. But yeah.
Is it 300 that we're assuming we're going to sell into this? Is that
300 Shirley, not 300 South Maple. Is that what you mean?
300 Shirley, right? So in other words, the entry to the park is going to be blanketed, or is going to be covered by ones that we own on both sides. Yeah, I mean, that's where I parked tonight, because there's a handicap spot right there, and I was struck by the width of that. It's not like the narrow space between Founders 2 and the thrift store, which actually turned out to be a pretty decent-sized walkway. Doesn't feel intimidating or, creepy looking. I mean, the entrance to Big Chimneys Park from Shirley is pretty ample space. I think you can step down, but you don't have to drastically step down to still retain. I mean, the existing unit there is a good solid 2-story plus roof building, and if you put a couple more stories on a newer building there, you'd still have a feeling that you were going into the park, not somehow, creeping through some narrow space. Okay, well, it seems like that was an issue at the meetings that I went to with some of the folks who live there. If we can all agree on that, or most of us, that's progress. Also, I wanted to ask a question about the streets. We're talking about these streets as if they are, you know, what they are now and forever will be. But that's not necessarily the case, is it? I mean, we have authority to do with the streets what we want. And I think the Planning Commission even has statutory authority to be involved in that. I would encourage us, if that gives us, I mean, right now, those streets are probably all too wide, number one. And if you can provide parking in some structure somewhere on the site, or parking accommodations on nearby buildings that have excess space in their garages, so you might be able to pick up some space by pinching in the streets. The streets are really wider than are necessary for what are essentially, it's a driveway. I mean, it's not a public street, but it's basically a driveway for these units. So I would encourage the market to not just take the existence of the streets as they are now as the way things have to be forever.
Question for staff, or maybe the Planning Commission remembers this. I think in the Planning Commission presentation, you guys had a slide that showed the setbacks at Pearson Square and Tax Analysts. Do you have that slide handy? I recall the setbacks varied from 25 to 35 feet.
Yes, and as we bring those up, I did want to return to, I think, an earlier point, which was our thinking is very aligned, I think, on the treatment as the Gibson Street development opportunities approach Big Chimneys, where that same bulk plane angle and the step backs we've been applying to the Winter Hill edge would also apply to both boundaries of the park as well. So 208 Gibson would be most impacted by that, and you wouldn't kind of have this drastic change from a 6 to 7 story building right down to the park space.
So that's just down the streets. That's Pearson and Tax Analysts. And it looks like setbacks are 20 to 25 feet and building height of 55 to 65.
Yeah, so this is at their most at their most minimal. So they range, right? So these are those minimal kind of pinch points along the site. They kind of range from, you know, these values here, and then in the rear can be, you know, up to 40 odd feet, I think. So we don't have, it kind of depends where you're measuring from, but these are the minimal values.
Thank you. Justine, you have your hand up? Justine, you have your hand up?
So from my perspective, like what I would love is I would love to have 120 units of housing, many of which are affordable. I'd love to have it be all 4 stories, and I'd love to have, like, you know, 50, 60% open space with, you know, shops and retail on the ground floor. And so, but there's a lot of trade-offs that we have to make. And so to the point before about, like, if we go too far down in terms of the height, then that means that maybe we don't get as many units for families. I think is an important trade-off for us to consider. And so for me, the RFQ process is actually going to inform a lot of what I would like to consider for the zoning process. And so, you know, if we can get basically everything we want in a 6-story building, that's where the density is focused on Maple Avenue, that would be great. But I guess I'd like to better understand what we're losing out on if we do cap everything at 6 stories. So my preference would be to have a more flexible code right now and then pare it down later based on what we find out the trade-offs are. So I would be in favor of 7 feet, or excuse me, 7 stories. And then seeing where that leads us and what happens if we, you know, do end up going to, if anybody can do it in 6 stories, but also have large family spaces and large open spaces and all sorts of other things. So I'd like to have a broader requirements right now for zoning would be my vote.
I was gonna echo what Ms. Underhill was saying. Is there a reason that this cannot be a suggestion of guidance for developers and say, we think it's 6 or 7 stories. We'd like to see what you come back with. We'd like it to be higher in this area. We've already, like in our way that we were approaching this entire process. It's to get feedback and ideas from developers. And if we go through the entire process right now to set these zoning requirements without knowing how that necessarily impacts a developer, you'll know better than I would, but like, I think that there would be an expectation that we could say, unless this gets us into legal jeopardy by changing the requirements after we're done, I think that I would love for us to offer guidance to these developers, say, this is what we think we want, here are the overarching outcomes that we want to drive. What do you have? And then city council can decide if they accept any of these, or if we want to move forward with some of these, and we can set zoning after that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we're looking for, is that market creativity, right? And that's the way Matt and his staff have really laid out this RFP from a language perspective. So I absolutely, I think you can say 6 or 7, depending on programming, right? And then we evaluate it, take a look at it, see what the potential design actually looks like with the setbacks, with the plane, and, you know, take it into consideration. I don't see a problem with that.
But you need to put that in the zoning code.
What I'm arguing is that we don't put it in the code, we put it in the RFP,
Yeah.
in the guidance, and then we see what the results are, and then we decide what we want in the zoning based on what that looks like.
I think we're proposing to do it in both, like in the zoning at first reading and then in the RFP, and then we see the responses, whether we like it or not, and then we change it at second reading if we need to, right?
There is another tier of codifying this where, in the same way, we've used the 150-foot dimension from Winter Hill to kind of establish the 4-story limit, which, by the way, I did want to come back to Mr. Snyder's comment. Is there, I know you mentioned you prefer 3 stories near Winter Hill, is there a portion of the property where you think it is appropriate to get up to 4 stories? Or is there is it the street? Is it further east? At one point, does it make sense to get to 4 if 3 is the edge? Because that logic is also what we could apply on Maple, where it's kind of reverse, where for this depth, you can do 7 stories. And then after that, perhaps after the first row of units on Maple, that's when we get to 5 or 6. So we could use that same structure and just be more even explicit in terms of the story count.
Does your bulk
If
plan
that
take
helps.
care of that stair step?
I think the bulk plane is really in effect and controls the first 40 to 60 feet on Winter Hill. After that, I think the height restrictions really kick in more than anything else.
If you want to go with 3 to 4, that makes sense then. If you're talking about flexibility, 6 to 7 in the denser areas, 3 to 4 in the areas focused on Winter Hill. And if you want to maximize that, then take a look at that, yeah.
So ranges.
To my mind, if we're going to express a range in the RFP, it seems there should be some expression of what we are willing to trade the larger stories for. So I guess I'm asking, does the RFP express a preference for larger sized units? And with
Not so much units, but it does have 3 scenarios where the middle one is kind of a low infill, 3 to 4 story option if we were to remove the city-owned lots. And then the third scenario is removing the current buildings, but having a more moderate mid-rise level of development that still follows the zoning language. So that's in the RFP today, but we don't get into the unit sizes or perhaps,
So I don't know what JLL would suggest is the most kind of profitable, affordable unit to build, but if that's a thing. But I guess I think if you're going to say 7 stories or 6, people will generally pick 7, and you might not get any 6. And so I think in order to get any 6s, you would have to express a preference for 6, but only if they can achieve X, Y, and Z within those 6 stories or something like that.
I think that makes sense. I think, we can look at this language with staff and kind of understand, and this is all great feedback about, is it larger unit sizes for families? Is it, let's squeeze as many units as we can in the 6, and we can get to some sort of, I don't want to say middle ground, but I think a good place for that preference, right, for that that scenario as it gets built out in the RFP process.
And I guess I would also encourage us to think about the scoring. I don't have an opinion on this, but just wherever we express a preference, I think it needs to be connected to the way we score the project.
Okay. So I heard openness to 6 or 7, with tapering back to 3 to 4 at the Winter Hill edge. Is that accurate encapsulation?
I think it is.
Okay. On setbacks, staff has proposed 25 feet. Currently, it is 40 feet setbacks. I've heard some Winter Hill neighbors ask for 60-foot setbacks. And how deep are these lots?
110.
Okay. And the front yard setback is also, the other thing is consider these, this is also the overlay for the non-city owned lots. And so there's also a front yard setback of 20 feet, right?
I mean, doesn't it make sense if you're going to do setbacks, considering the uniqueness of this site, that you want the setbacks in the back adjoining the Winter Hill, and you could gain additional square footage in the front and maybe in the side than you're currently proposing? So how about some more flexibility there as well?
That was one of my questions, because the front yard setback is currently 15 feet, and staff is proposing to go to 20. And I think on Maple, our streetscape standard said it only needs to go to 16 or 18 feet. So I didn't know why we were more generous than our streetscape standards, if that gives another 2 feet of building.
We can take a look at that. I think there was a nod to recent SC projects where I think the streetscapes at certain density levels, and even considering the Quinn site across the street. So 20, I think, was a target, but certainly as we kind of squeeze this water balloon, we can certainly look at maybe condensing some of that if we can be more effective on the other edge of the property.
Something like that, yeah.
Do people feel wed, I guess for an easy one, front setback, feel wed to 20-foot front yard setback?
Yeah, I would too. Go to 10.
Well, we'd be breaking our own streetscape standards. We wanted it to be a nice streetscape as well.
Well, but
For
you're
future
trying to,
residents.
it's probably presumably going to be residential. You're trying to create a front porch culture, you know, or you're right pretty close to the street, because it's not really a street. Like I said earlier, it's, I don't know. I'm 20 is way too much, and I'd go as low as 10, but certainly pick up whatever you can in the back. As far as the back goes, one of the questions that was asked today, the walk around, was the existing vegetation wall against Winter Hill is pretty impressive. I mean, you know, is construction going to remove all of that, as is the norm when big construction projects are done, or what are the prospects in building that you are able to preserve some of the mature plantings, trees, et cetera? It just gives people a certain degree of comfort if they don't lose all the existing trees that they see out their back window.
I think
Is that
we've walked the
practical?
site with several staff, urban designers, our arborists, and the feedback we received is that obviously there's a natural intent to keep as much of the canopy in place. It helps meet, you know, the other requirements that we have. Tree canopy will be triggered by any site plan submission, even though this particular overlay doesn't speak to it. It applies to all projects throughout the city. But more importantly, there were observations that some of the plantings have been kind of installed along a hill as you kind of leave Virginia Village and get into Winter Hill. Not the safest and durable installation method. There were some invasives there as well. Not all were bad, but I think there is an intent to what's healthy and should survive and thrive we want to keep. And again, a lot of it is on privately held units that are not redeveloping. So.
Right, exactly. Not much of the city land even backs up to that. But still, I think that's a good idea. Similarly, the back space behind Pearson Square, there were some complaints at the time when that was developed that the construction itself disturbed the foundations of some of the units, and that needs to be in the minds of applicants proposers, responders to the RFPs, that extra special care needs to be taken for no disruption or destruction of undermining of existing foundations of the residences.
So are there tree canopy requirements in the overlay or the underlining zone?
There are not, because those would apply to all development in the city. So we're relying on that relationship already kind of codified in the ordinance. So, and we're doing a final pass this week because there are other things like parking requirements that also would apply, and making sure that are there any categories that we do need to be explicit in the current overlay versus what's already spelled out for, and developers will just need to kind of reference those sections.
So if it's residential, is it the 20% canopy in 10 years that R1A, R1B has to fall under, or is it the new 10% for commercial mixed-use development that we just adopted? Or neither?
Let us get back to you on that one.
Okay. Be helpful to know. I think Erin likely will have a question on that too, if she doesn't already.
Yeah, she was curious about the green space. So I'd be okay with 35 in the back, 18 in the front.
I'm okay with that.
Anyone else?
This picture that you have here of, on Shirley, it's got it's 30 feet from back of curb to house. It's right here.
Correct.
That's 30. So can we pull that down to like 18?
I believe those were built well before anything we had in the ordinance.
So some comparisons. The Spectrum was built with the old 14-foot setback, the Broadway with a 14-foot setback, and then it was expanded to 20 feet, so more recent projects like Founder's Row is a 20-foot setback.
But if this is residential.
Yeah.
Right, but just in terms of kind of what the feel is from the setback from the road.
We adopted 20 for Broad and Washington, and then 18 or 16 for Park Avenue, Maple, kind of the secondary roads, right? I think it's the streetscape standards.
I think what
Does that sound right? Yeah. 18 for, I didn't remember the standard for the, so for T-zones, we did have a setback requirement for T-zones. It was different, obviously.
It was different, that it was not the full 20-foot setbacks that we have on Broad and Washington. I want to
think
say
it
it was
was
slightly reduced.
15, is that right, Jack? Was it 15? But those are like 4-story, they're, what was the height cap? 45 feet? And I guess
Yeah.
at least on Maple, we're contemplating a 70-foot
Right.
height. That's why, that was the reason that we raised whether the initial setback
Yeah.
requirement was
And this
appropriate.
adopted streetscape standards do suggest a minimum of 18.
So what Ms. Connolly is saying is this picture we're looking at is a house on Shirley that bumps up to Winter Hill, and it's got a 30-foot front setback. So if the new zoning was an 18-foot, you're bringing that structure forward, and then you could easily do the 35 back setback because now that structure is 12 feet further up. So
general agreement that front yard setbacks are too generous as is. Consider going down to 18 on Maple, even with kind of 7 stories potentially there. I think I'd be fine with it. If 20 is what we allow on Broad and Washington at up to 85 feet in an SE, right? Feels like 18 feet setbacks for a 7-story on Maple. I think the question is internal to the project on Shirley, do you still need 18-foot setbacks as well? Or could you have a different front yard setback if you're an internal parcel?
yeah, you could.
Or if you're going to make the street, change the street, as Mr. Duncan suggested, you could.
We don't own enough of Shirley
we don't
to
own enough
change
Shirley.
enough
Right,
of
right,
Shirley
right.
to
True, true.
change a street of change Shirley, but
No, but you're right. Is your point saying that the street streetscape standards could be different because this is an internal street. It's not a major corridor, is what you're saying.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's not Maple.
That makes sense to me. You could even make it 10 feet. I don't know.
Could you have, in the overlay, could you have a different front yard setback for an internal street?
We could have anything we
And it's
want.
whatever the name, I don't even know what the name is, but whatever the name is, right?
Well, I think that solves a lot of our issues then with bumping up to Winter Hill, is you bring all those properties on Shirley Street, have them all come up. And then that has a lot more buffer now in the back, and you can do that 30-foot, and then still have enough for a developer to put in some townhomes and.
We can customize it where Shirley, Gibson, and Maple have individual ones, or we can streamline it if we feel like there's some numbers that work equally. I think it is, in our mind at least, driven by the density and height that could result in either side of those streets. So obviously the taller buildings can be the bigger separation you want because it's going to create bigger shadows. I think we're very mindful of the fact that the southern exposure and how we dictate what happens between Shirley and Maple will have bigger impacts on the other side of Shirley, just given the way shadows are created throughout the day. So playing that into the consideration was helpful, but we can draft that this week.
And then also think about this would apply to the non-city-owned quads and what might happen there, right? So if we are thinking reducing the front yard setback down to 15 feet or 12 feet, or something less than 18, if you think the likely scenario is mix of market rate and affordable townhomes, like what do we think the appropriate front yard setbacks could be for townhomes there? So we need to account for that. But I'm hearing general support that we are more comfortable with relaxing front yard setbacks, especially on the Shirley and internal streets and Gibson.
And then I do have a question. What would be the minimum street right-of-way width that we could accept?
So at present, the current right-of-ways would continue because we need to maintain access to the existing properties that are not redeveloping. That primarily impacts Shirley. On Gibson, there is a kind of a informal entrance into an off-street parking area behind 300 and 302. So that would also have to be something we maintain, regardless of the reconfiguration of the parcels and right-of-way. But I think the overall width is something we're considering as we look at parking and making the appropriate reservations. We've heard loud and clear kind of the way this site came to be over the years, probably underestimated historical parking demand. It's kind of structured as if these were single-family homes, but in fact, each one has 4 units, more renters, more residents. So factoring that into the equation, and also kind of being mindful of the RFP, signaling to the development community that, hey, once you look at the neighbors, there might be some, parking, shared parking opportunities available. Let's at least try to explore that, reach out to those individuals, and see how we can kind of solve this.
One more question on setbacks. I asked this the past 2 meetings. Besides the Pearson Square kind of being a data point, Pearson and tax analysts with the 20 to 25-foot setbacks, what are our rear yard setbacks in other projects across the city relative to the height abutting those residential areas? Because I guess for us to settle on, should it be 25, should it be 30, should it be 35, should it be 40, keep it as is. I guess I would love more context on what we've done elsewhere. I think Winter Hill probably, when we did a separate walking tour of them last week, they were like, we feel like we're treating differently. And so I'd like to know kind of what we've done with SEs across the city and to know whether 25, 30, 35, 40 would be appropriate and consistent with how we thought about this elsewhere.
And I think in time for Thursday's distribution of the next report, we can probably go back in the last however many SE projects, and the ones which do not have a street in the back of the property but do abut to residential properties, what was that outcome? And provide that context before we introduce any other adjustments to that setback.
Okay. Yeah, because I think it's just hard for us. Other than the walking tour was helpful to see it, but to decide whether it's 25, 30, 35 or more, it'd be nice to use other projects as context.
So you're particularly talking about Northgate, Broad and Washington. How many others? Not that many others.
Founders too, but streets that
Right,
then face
Founders
residential.
One,
But
right, same.
West Spread.
Lawton.
Yeah, right, I should have started with that one. We talked about that in our meeting, and that linear park behind it, is at some places, I think up to 40, but that's also, I think, a taller building that looms over the house, so the greater distance is appropriate there.
Okay. It sounds like that's a takeaway for next time. Anything else on front or rear setbacks?
Clarification, so. Looking at the lots we don't own, 305 and 307, you could technically have a 7-story building fronting Shirley with a 10-foot setback. Is that right? And is that what we want? You're talking about a 10-foot sidewalk and a 7-story building fronting Shirley. Is that, I'm just thinking that through, is that what we want?
So I believe that's part of the analysis we're going to have this week in terms of looking at all 3 streets, the scale of height that we're ending up on, it seems like, and what is the appropriate transition so that the pedestrian experience along all 3 streets is appropriate given the scale of that site.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all comfortable with the 18 feet on Maple, but you could have the same building frontage on Shirley with the current code, and that seems like you might not have enough sidewalk there.
So a question, if you can step down buildings, why can't you step down the entire site? In other words, say, if you're up against a commercial building, you can go to X, otherwise you step down the whole larger site. Can't you do that?
We can, and
To
I
have
think
the same setbacks in every part of the site, do you? If you have a logical reason for differences.
Yeah.
So if it fronts Winter Hill, it could be 35 feet. But if it fronts Shirley Street, it could be 25 feet. And likewise, the front yard.
it kind of gets into the more surgical strike that I was mentioning earlier, where in the same height restriction we already placed near Winter Hill, you could apply similar guidance on Shirley and Maple, where
Right.
up to a certain depth, perhaps,
Yeah.
maybe it's 5 to 6 on Shirley and 6 to 7 on Maple. And that kind of
Yeah.
guarantees maybe
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
gradual step up across the entire property, not just along Winter Hill.
Right.
And then maybe treating properties north of Gibson slightly differently, where it sounds like everybody is comfortable with the greatest heights being there.
Mhm.
Maybe that's not necessary.
Yeah.
Okay. Zoe, do we want to go back to your presentation, or do we cover all the slides?
I think this is Jack's portion. I'm all good. This is Jack's portion, so he's
Okay.
the one to ask.
Do we cover all the zoning elements, Jack? I know we jumped all over
I'm
the place.
afraid to answer that.
That's it. Well, that's slide 1 of, 20.
So I think we tackled setbacks pretty well. But so, we only have a couple left, which was housing and affordability. We touched a little bit on that at the top of the meeting. I don't know if there's any more discussion on the current proposal, which again is, to access the density in the overlay district. The current proposal calls for a minimum of 50% total unit contribution as affordable, or a 1-for-1 replacement of existing units, whichever is greater, at 60% AMI or below.
I just have a question about the starter home purchases. As we've developed affordable housing over the last 25 years, one of the things we learned is that some of those early developments, someone purchased affordable housing and then got such a huge payout and none of it came back to the city. Have we come up with a way to share that back with the city? And would that be in here as well? Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I'm quite following this.
So some of the early, like,
Broadway, Byron,
right,
like all the, we had 80 ADUs as condos, and there was no profit sharing like we do now in the Affordable Home Ownership Program, where there is.
right. So would we have is there profit sharing contemplated in the starter townhomes or equity sharing or?
I think we've relied on, on whatever the city policy is at the moment.
Okay.
And so, whether that's expressly codified in the zoning ordinance or, it lives as just how the city's policy and how we implement that regulation is, I think maybe something I might need to have more conversations with our housing folks about, what's the best, how to best exercise that.
I don't know that that has to be in the zoning.
Yeah,
Probably
I'm not
doesn't,
sure it does, but we
just-
definitely want to make sure that it's covered.
Okay.
Pretty, there's like some cap on the equity and the sharing goes back into the fund. I mean, this is rattling around as something I remember hearing.
Yeah.
Right, so the home ownership program, we tried to correct that.
Yeah, there's a 70-30, but I think what Mary Beth is asking about is in this project, if there's a LIHTC funded starter home, I mean, I don't even know if LIHTC does ownership. I think it's mainly multifamily rental. So I don't know whether we're going to get starter home ownership, but the point of wanting to make sure there's some sort of equity sharing, similar to how we've evolved the affordable ownership program.
Thank you.
Anything else on zoning, Bob?
Yeah, just on the, so the 50% I think is a great goal, but I thought I heard somebody say just now about 50% is not going to make it financially feasible for a developer, that there would have to be a contribution by the city. Is that correct?
I think we're getting into shared perspectives on anytime a developer, particularly a private developer, I'll give you an example. Let's say 3 or 4 of the privately held owners either just agree on a price, reach out to a development partner, hey, we're not developers, can you take this through the process for us? That individual or that team is going to look at the very onerous expectations that we have for either open space or affordability, and they're going to tell them that based on how much you've acquired and consolidated, at this point, having a 50% building that's affordable and 50% that's market rate, you're going to struggle to get financing for that, either paying on your own or getting support from others. And at that scale, most cases, just based on the lending environment we're in, you're going to likely get into a mostly, if not 100% affordable situation just to get the financing. So we're kind of playing out the likely scenarios of would somebody actually take up the 50% requirement and deliver that on their own versus ask for help and maybe switch their entire portfolio because they won't be otherwise to secure funding and financing.
So we're not creating a situation where it's not financially unfeasible by this zoning restriction.
So we're very mindful not to take away zoning options. The underlying zoning districts remain. We're adding a new optional zoning overlay, much like the MUR was done in the 90s. But what we're saying is, for you to be able to take advantage of this, and it's very prescriptive, but in some cases it does add flexibility. This is what you're going to have to deliver to us. These are the non-negotiables. And we believe that in many of these cases, it's likely that folks may look at that and just say, I'm going to just follow my underlying zoning because it doesn't come with all the restrictions and requirements, even though I'm only able to do 3 stories and still apply different setbacks. And this is kind of a live testing of the what-ifs, given what future conditions and decisions might be for the private property owners.
Yeah, and just to add to that, it comes down to the unit yield, right? So when we look back at the map and you look at the 2 parcels on the south side of Shirley, the question came up, could you go 7 stories? And I think if you're really just assembling those 2, Probably not, because that's going to be a very tall, skinny building, and that's going to be expensive to build. And at the same time, from a unit yield perspective, you might not even achieve that one-for-one replacement. So at that point, you're looking at a 100% affordable building. So I think, the point we're speaking to earlier is that you could see higher percentages of affordability in not only the programming for the city-owned parcels, but also the privately owned parcels as well.
I have one final thought as we think about worst-case scenarios and setbacks. Sorry to bring back setbacks again. So we've talked a lot about setbacks to Winter Hill because that's the community we've heard from. I want us to be equally thoughtful about side yard setbacks in the non-city-owned quads in a scenario where nothing happens to them. What does that side yard look like, for example, between 302 and 304 Shirley, 308, 310, the edge of 303? So be thoughtful about what the side edges look like, assuming nothing happens on the non-city-owned quads. And then what would happen if some of those choose to redevelop? What does that essentially lock them into something? So I know we've talked a lot about setbacks to adjacent residential, but I think the current residents of Virginia Village for the non-city-owned quads merit the same consideration.
And I'll just add to that. So right now we have internal to the district a 20-foot setback for any property that redevelops against a residential district. And then as just part of the site plan ordinance, there's additional screening, buffering, and vegetative landscape requirements that come into play as well.
So we're saying if you're internal, you only have a 20-foot setback and you can go up to 7 stories with a 10-foot step back. But if you're buffering to Winter Hill, we want to be way more generous and give you 35 feet. And no building, you can't get to 7 stories until you're 150 feet back. Right? Is that my understanding of the zoning?
Yes.
Okay. So the Winter Hill concerns were, we feel like we are not listening to them. I think this feels like we're being quite considerate of the Winter Hill edge. Okay. Anything else on setbacks or other zoning elements?
I don't know if it's probably not a zoning element, but the whole issue of service, entrance and parking, you don't want that up against Winter Hill or against other residences. Does that have to be dealt with in zoning, or is that more dealt with otherwise?
We can take a look at best practices for, I think, controlling, not just proximity, but like the orientation of potential site configurations as they relate to parking structures. So we've heard that before.
Yeah.
We can take a look at that.
Okay.
Do we still need to talk about the RFP, or have we covered enough of the RFP? We are also at 10:30. People need a break if we do need to cover the RFP separately.
I do need to cover the RFP separately.
Okay. So do we want to take a break before we revisit?
Is that all the zoning?
Is there anything else on
Anything else
zoning?
on zoning, Jack? Yeah.
Okay, so let's,
Hang on.
is that all for zoning, or do we?
Yeah, I mean, the last piece, we've kind of talked about it too, but we didn't maybe as directly as the other gateway into the density, which is the 50% open space option.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing else on zoning, why don't we come back at 10:35 and we'll pick up the RFP. Thank you all. We're at 10:40, so I'd like to resume the meeting. I know, it's fine. Okay, it's 10:40. We're 5 minutes after when we're supposed to resume. It is 2 a.m. German time for Laura, so I would like to get her out of here. Okay, are the cameras back? Thank you all for resuming. Are we back on? Okay. I think we lost some planning commission members, but the hardiest three are still here, so thank you. I think we would like to finish up this discussion on Virginia Village with the RFP, so staff?
Well, we'll turn it over to Matt for this as well, but it's been a Herculean effort to take all the input that we've gotten on this and try to listen to all voices and still have, a document that the market can respond to responsively. So Matt, why don't you give us an update on it? And the request is to schedule council consideration of a motion next week on the 22nd to authorize staff to issue the RFP.
Yeah, feedback has been excellent. We really took the time to read every comment that was submitted. I think the track changes reflect that, so we're very mindful of issuing the red lines and kind of allowing everybody to track what's changed. I think the latest version kind of removed some of the redundancies that perhaps were kind of beginning to be repetitive as we got from one section to another. I think it more accurately reflected the way we want to introduce ourselves to the market and kind of who we are. And you'll see, I think, even the evaluation criteria benefits from kind of the neighborhood compatibility element, which now has 10 points, which we took away from some of the other elements there. So again, I think it's in a great shape. I will expect to get some final comments. They would be preferred by close of business Tuesday, but I'll make Wednesday morning work as well. But we are planning to issue kind of a final version on Thursday that would be coming in front of you on Monday night. So I appreciate everybody's thoughtful comments, and it's come a long way.
Okay. Questions or comments?
Tuesday is in tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay,
Really tonight,
I could say Wednesday midday, but then I'm going to really get in trouble with the clerk. So
No, I'm just.
Okay, questions or comments on the RFP draft? I think we're on version 4, 5.
I have a couple.
Okay.
Okay. My first question is, at the very beginning, there's a ranking of the offerers. Who is ranking the offerers? Is it the selection committee, or is it the city council? Is the selection committee advising the city council?
So a couple of things are going to happen, and we have Nick here to join us. We're going to be heavily relying on JLL to help evaluate the proposals and get the evaluation committee and staff in the best place possible to what may be a large volume of proposals and bids, but really kind of getting as best as we can apples to apples comparison of what we're going to receive, and then utilizing that plus the selection criteria that's in the RFP now to kind of present this in a way that I think everybody can easily follow. The balancing act is we're trying to get a section of the proposals to have an executive summary that we do want to share publicly. I think everybody's interested, and we want to be transparent about what we're seeing and what we're receiving. But a lot of the other information that has proprietary data or perhaps additional information, that's where we're going to have to be very careful and follow protocol with procurement. But as it relates to what you just mentioned, I think we are trying to rank in terms of the point system and kind of explain how we got there, and that's going to be on the evaluation committee.
Okay. But the evaluation committee will do all of that. Well, the city council will still have access to see all of the proposals, right?
Correct, because
Yeah,
it ultimately has to be presented to you all for a final vote.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you. That was number one. Okay, number two. There's a number of times here where just the grammar of saying comprised of, it should say composed of or comprising. Can you fix just, and it was a few different times, so can you just do a search and replace and fix that? Scenario A, number 3, we mentioned increasing bedroom numbers. No, it says increasing bedroom sizes, but it should really be increasing bedroom numbers. Or counts?
It's a combination of the
Combination?
two, because in that scenario, or it may be even the first one, we're trying to expand horizontally, and when you look at, it's really interesting if you're inside one of the units, the way that they are able to subdivide and create 4 units within that quadplex. It does limit you in terms of where you can expand, where it's very challenging. I'll stop short of saying impossible, but to add a unit, you really do have to go vertical.
Yeah.
You could put yourself in a position where you're adding a bedroom if you go horizontal. So it's kind of the bedroom size, which we did here as a potential target and goal, but also additional units if you're able to go
Right.
vertical.
But what about the bedroom count? Go from a 1-bedroom to a 2-bedroom, as opposed to a 100-square-foot bedroom to a 120-square-foot bedroom?
We can make the distinction.
Yeah, so if it just says sizes and counts, not just sizes. All right, then a lot of these we already covered. I mentioned my request to do GI Bill 1940s history, so page 16C, it would fit really nicely in there. And then my last is just the ESC recommendation. And Mr. Stevens and I were in the ESC meeting when they were talking about changing that wording and sent sort of a paragraph of what that could be. So page 17, number 8, and then page 27, the ESC provided some really clear definitions of
EGC.
EGC.
Yeah. Enterprise Green Community was the standard that they were recommending.
As opposed to Earthcraft, which may or may not exist in Virginia anymore, or Energy Star or LEED. That was their very strong recommendation. And Matt on the ESC had a lot of expertise in that area, so I just feel like it would be really good to either talk to him or figure that out, because he was deep into that.
We'll take a look. I think that one just happened to be coming in as we were publishing the latest version, so we just kind of crossed paths, but we're aware of it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And that is all I have. Thank you.
Other questions or comments on the RFP? Planning Commission? Okay, well, I guess while we have JL at the table, so a question, or several questions I've had the past several weeks that probably would benefit from your discussion here is, one, as you can tell, we've been wrestling a lot with guardrails, and I think the balance we're trying to strike is provide enough guardrails to the community so that there's some certainty of what we might get, while also creating enough flexibility that we actually elicit creative proposals from the development community. I guess in this current draft version 4, do you feel like we are striking that balance appropriately such that we will get responses? And the part B to that question is the aggressive timeline that everyone, is also kind of have some angst over. How will the development community respond to that? And then the third part of that is the sequencing with zoning. So the fact that we're trying to decide some of the zoning now and then finalize with that, those 3 components, like I would love to know kind of the real estate perspectives on that.
Let's start with the timeline. I think you have set out a pretty aggressive timeline, but I think that also indicates to the market that you're pretty real about execution, right? So I think number one, from a timeline perspective, I'm okay with where you are and the sprint here, because you put a lot of time and effort and thought into this, and I think that speaks through the language that's in the current RFP draft now. Regarding flexibility, yeah, I think, we've taken a look at this now a couple times, looked at a couple different iterations with Matt, and we feel as though the different scenarios that have been laid out do provide for a certain level of market creativity that we're expecting to see that should present some separation between firms that respond to this, right? So, we don't want to see, I don't think we want to see 5 firms come out with the same 5 sets of the same program, right? I think we want to see a little bit of flexibility, creativity, different ways of attacking the market. So that's a good thing. Yeah, I think it's in pretty good shape.
And what about the sequencing or the concurrency of?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you mentioned the sequencing. I actually think it's a unique opportunity to have kind of I'd say 95% the way their kind of zoning thought process that then gets refined at the end once you see what the responses look like. And then you can take those responses and maybe get some great ideas about how to attack the zoning piece and then layer that in at the end. I think it's a good process rather than being too prescriptive from the outset.
I guess as our consultant, you would tell us.
I'd tell you if you're going in the wrong direction. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. That's reassuring. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions for either Nick or staff?
I'm looking at Ms. Flynn's questions that she sent in to Mr. Shields about the 30-point evaluation criteria for budget and financing. The matrix still references a $100,000 subsidy cap per unit. Is this intentional or something that should have been removed?
I think it should be removed.
There were 2 references to that. We got rid of the first one. That's going to come out.
Okay. And then also a summary of JLL pro formas, even if confidential, and when the city will perform its fiscal analysis.
So here's what I would recommend is that we use JLL when we have the proposals and do the fiscal analysis with the proposals in hand. There has been some discussion about having our consultants do and sort of present to council their assessment of the 3 scenarios even before we issue the RFP. I think kind of your spending of consultant dollars is better kind of with the proposals in hand and applying them to what we get in. So Jones Lang LaSalle will provide the evaluation committee some baseline pro formas for the scenario. So that will be done in that August timeframe so that you have kind of a start point. That all is going to be shared with the city council. But I think it would be worthwhile to take the time to do that and not rush that before issuing the RFP. And I think there's also some value in sort of looking at Jones Lang LaSalle's pro formas sort of at the same time you're looking at what the market provided as opposed to in advance. So that's what I will, in the notes back to Aaron's questions, that's what we'll lay out.
Just to add to that, we talked through this with both Matt and the city manager, just even as recent as the end of last week, and we're very comfortable with that approach.
Okay.
I do have a question, if I may, and that is, will the scoring recommendation that the city council receives, will the city council produce its own scoring also, or will they ratify it, or what's the final scoring document that we're who produces that?
It's a good question. So the evaluation committee will produce that, and then the council can decide, I think, if the council wants to do their own, they can. What I think would be another option would be the council to get the briefing from the evaluation committee and then take it from there. I think the council will either say, we accept these recommendations, it all makes sense to us, let's proceed with negotiations with the top 2, follow the procurement laws on terms of our negotiations. Or the council could say, we're not satisfied with the evaluation process, we're going to do our own kind of de novo. I think the council can make that decision.
Final questions or comments? Dave?
Yeah. Does the city council have the ability to say, after we go through the RFP process, 2 of the proposals meet the minimum requirements, but we don't like them, and so we don't take them. Sometimes if you're in a procurement process and someone meets the requirements, you can't back out. Or if you do back out, then then you get into termination for convenience or termination for cause. So my question is, because a lot's said tonight about flexibility, how much flexibility do we really have for the RF? Could we end up with, we don't like any of what we've seen, even if one or more of them contend that they met the minimum requirements?
So the RFP is explicit in that the city may choose to accept no proposals. Is there any more to say about that?
Well, if it's that clear, then, yeah.
But I think when I hear the term minimum requirements, it's simply requirements to be considered, not to be accepted or selected. I also think purchasing team is very good at utilizing kind of standard language which we're by design not reviewing, because it's not meant to be reviewed in this setting, but that I think gives us the authority and the power to negotiate with multiple entities if we choose to, not accept any proposals if that's where we want to be. So I think a lot of that is embedded in the language that our purchasing agent maintains.
So I'd like to just say that is, Virginia law allows you to completely decide to not proceed with an RFP. But, and I'll have to refresh my memory on this, there are some rules around that so that you can't just use it as a strategy to not have to go with the top ranked offerer. So you have to like abandon it for a period of, you have to abandon it legitimately. It can't just be an excuse to reissue the same one and then pick rig it so that the person that you would have rather had been the top ranked is the top ranked. So I say all that to say, yes, you can eliminate the RFP, but you can't just immediately turn around and reissue another. So
Right. I'm not suggesting we'd rig anything, but I think you want to make
Yeah, I
sure that
probably
there's a
shouldn't have said that.
general understanding of
Yeah.
what is the law in Virginia with
Right.
regard to making final decisions
Right.
on the.
So that's the law that, as I just described it. But then the law also says you have to negotiate with the top ranked offeror first. So I don't think you're allowed to negotiate with multiple respondents. And if you don't get a deal with the top ranked offeror, then you have to go to the second.
Yeah, it's just this kind of so that people know what the rules of play are going into this, so that we don't wrongly assume we have more flexibility than we actually do have with this process, or the reverse. Thanks.
Anything else?
Madam Mayor, I should have piped up when Mary Beth said this. Can we, in the document, make sure we peg whatever year these buildings are actually built? I've seen 1941, I've heard post-war, I've heard GI Bill. GI Bill didn't pass until 1944, so it'd be nice to be able to say they're 85-plus years old. So that's why I use 1941. I've seen that somewhere, but you now have the opportunity to declare for all time what the official date is. So.
Mr. Snyder, I did just find, because I remembered reading that on the RFP, page 26, there's a line that says, the city reserves the right at its sole discretion to reject any or all proposals. So that is in there.
Okay. So with that, I think we're done with Virginia Village for tonight. Thank you all. Look forward to the next turn, hopefully the final set of documents this week. Thank you. Hopefully the next few items will be quick. It is now 4 a.m. Yeah, poor Laura. It's 4 a.m. for Laura, so.
So. Extra espresso in it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's always there. Sometimes there's a difference between a request for information.
Planning Commission, you're welcome to keep staying if you want to talk about personal property tax relief.
That's what I just want people to understand.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next up is personal property tax relief ordinance, and our Commissioner of Revenue, Tom Clinton, is here to give the staff report on this. And the request is to schedule first reading at your next meeting on June 22nd. You're welcome.
Yeah, this is,
So is available, and David and Tom work on this together.
yep, Daniel and Jody and, so basically this has been like a three-way process in the past that we did right before we ran the book. And so the city attorney has discovered that this should be a city council process. So we're, here to share, the process. And the one thing that we added this year was maybe raising the minimum amount of tax from a $1,500 threshold to $3,000. That was never indexed for inflation, a lot like the $20,000 limit was never indexed for inflation. And we spend a lot of time, high mileage and body damage. As cars get older, there's a lot more variables. So that was the one new addition. We also have comparisons to our neighbors, what they're doing. So we have all that information. It's kind of a, somewhat of a follow-up to the budget process. And so, we have our information now from the budget process, and we're just going to work on the PPTRA relief rate.
Okay.
And they are trending down. As cars are more expensive, there's more cars in the city and just Northern Virginia kind of in general. So what started out at 70% is dropping, pretty much every year or every other year, with some jurisdictions, including Arlington, really plummeting to 13%. So kind of like we tend to be, we're kind of in the middle.
Yeah, so the genesis of this, I think, if I recall from the budget season, was that we were debating raising the car tax from $4.80 to $5 per $100 in value, but we said, could we offset that by changing the relief amount so people, presumably with lower value cars, i.e. lower income households, would get more relief. In the end, our revenue numbers trended up, so we didn't need to actually raise the car tax rates, but I think there was still interest in revisiting this because, one, the operational complexity of having to give relief when the threshold's only $1,500 didn't seem worth it, and then two, the same sentiment that could we give relief to more people with lower value cars still stood, especially with higher tax burden elsewhere and cost of living in general. So this tracks with kind of my expectation from when we discussed it budget season. The only thing that was missing, which I know the staff report had talked about, was why we can't recommend changing it for EV cars or giving some relief to EVs to advance kind of a public policy goal of like, hey, if you have an EV, we're going to give you more tax relief than if you have a gas car.
What's kind of surprising is two jurisdictions have moved away from that. So I think that's probably just a sign of the budget times, and maybe they figured people were buying them anyway, and why separate out a particular class of vehicles. But we could maybe talk to them and see, was there anything else apparent, why they made those decisions?
You think they just needed the tax revenue?
Yeah, so at least in the staff report it says Arlington, it was Arlington, Loudoun, used to provide a higher relief percentage for EVs, but they did away with those separate relief rates this budget year, so it must have just been with this tough budget year. Yeah, it's interesting.
And the other thing that's important is we were given a set amount of relief like a dollar amount per
Right.
year, and it's a matter of how we allocate it. So it's not like if we change percentage, we get to give more relief. We still have a set amount. So by giving more relief, if you scroll back up, if we give more relief to the first $3,000 in value, people above 3,000, or the cars with higher value, pay slightly more because they get less relief amounts from the state.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I think
That's the
it's,
trade-off. It's not like it's free money.
Right.
It's the same amount of money, we just get to allocate it differently, allocate the relief differently.
and it's supposed to be break even, you're right.
This is very confusing how we do the car tax in Virginia. Instead of just changing the rates, we like have these rates and then we give relief. So people have questions or comments for Tom or David?
So quickly, this helps people with the least expensive cars. We're assuming they're the people with the lowest income, lowest net
Yeah.
worth. But it may not be. It could be anyone who has a really beater old pickup truck, for example.
Like your husband?
Right, like.
A couple of us might have.
Like it could be, this could be for anyone. This isn't specifically targeted towards the same people that we're targeting property tax or real estate tax relief. Okay.
Yeah. It's a proxy, but probably not perfect.
So the proposal is we would move from the 1,500 to the 3,000. Is that?
Yes.
That's what's being proposed.
So you'd
And
capture
mainly-
another like 1,100, 1,000 cars or so.
Yeah, and mainly the rate. We've actually valued the vehicles early just to, fact check it against our estimate, and we've settled on 31%. We think and the best comparison is probably Fairfax City, not surprising. They're similar to us in size and makeup of vehicles and stuff, and they're at 31.5%. They're still at the $1,000 limit, whereas our proposal is for $3,000. And Arlington does it different. They give the up to $4,000 tax break for everyone, whether it's, and then the rate kicks in after that.
So if you're currently a $3,000 car, only your first $1,500 would get relief, and you currently pay taxes on the
Right.
$1,500 to $3,000. But under this change, if you're a $3,000 car, all of it would get relief.
Right. And then there's the license or decal fee.
So that's a separate conversation.
still-
which I don't think we love the decal fee from previous budget seasons, but we'll pin that for next year's budget.
We thought about that, and, did we want to roll too many things into kind of a tight budget year? And so some of the other thoughts we had, we kind of left off.
I would support this.
Other,
Just a question, what is the impact on people that say, what's the average cost of a new car now, $40,000 or something? So what's the impact on somebody owning a
I think it's $4.
Huh?
I think it's $4 by, raising from 15 to 3,000. I think it's $4
for the average car.
for the average car.
It's interesting how if you went to 4,000 for relief, it jumps up
Yeah.
$12. Just means that the band of cars, there are a lot more cars in
Yeah.
the next band, I think.
And that's where administratively it would be, a bit easier. And give people the peace of mind too, they don't have to come in and submit, body damage and high mileage, just gives us a little more flexibility.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I think we're ready for this next week. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, sure.
Hard to make you wait so long.
No problem. I love the stuff. I wish I could have made the tour.
This is a first reading, second reading thing, right?
Right.
And we have to go to, okay.
Yeah, first reading would be next Monday.
Right.
Okay. Consent? There's 3 things on consent next week.
Do you want me to just go through them real quickly?
Mm-hmm.
So the first is contract with S&S Partners LLC to perform the Walden Court stormwater improvements. The contract amount is $1,271,000. As is noted in the staff report, this is about 21% above our original or our engineer's estimate for the project. phase one. We do have the Virginia stormwater grant dollars that will be used to pay for this work. So that's the Walden Corp item. The second one is a contract for the library to purchase their ebooks through Overdrive. And then the third is the authorize the mayor to enter into and execute the 2027-2028 Northern Virginia Workforce Investment Board Consortium Agreement.
So my only comment is the Walden Court, the link says Walden Park on the agenda. So I might want to correct that for the, yes.
And Mr. Schultz, just to clarify for the public, the ebooks and audiobooks, that was something that was already approved in the budget, right?
That is.
So this is like not a new expense or anything,
right.
this is already.
That's right.
Any other questions or comments on the consent agenda for next week? So I didn't know I was the one entering an agreement. I don't think that's ever.
Yeah, it's a regional agreement, and that seems to be that all the mayors sign.
Yeah.
Okay. I've never done it before, so I didn't even know we had. Okay. Any final items? Because I think we're going to let Laura go home and we'll tackle schedule Wednesday morning if there's nothing else. I guess for the 3 members of council left, I send you an email with very detailed update on the city manager search process. If people could read that before Wednesday, we can discuss dates and starting to schedule blocks of time Wednesday morning after we get through schedule.
Okay.
So,
Great.
thank you all. Good night. Thank you
Great.
for the
Thank
lengthy
you,
meeting.
Council.
We didn't talk about the sip and stroll, the biggest success at Falls Church
Yes.
in months. It was huge. So thank you to everyone
Yeah.
who
Yes.
made that happen. There are a lot of people
Very
that
nice
participated. It was very nice.
I know that was it was a heavy lift. Well, kudos to the mayor. I think that was your idea a long time ago, and kudos to the Economic Development Office and everyone. I mean, it was just, yeah. So I was abroad, and I was getting texts and pictures from people who were going to this. I mean, people were very excited
You had
about
FOMO?
it. So yeah, I did definitely have FOMO, but no, my point is like people were really excited about it, and so yeah.
And kudos to our restaurant and business community for making
Yes.
it a great event.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody pitched in.
Yeah, I've never seen our streets so busy, like ever. So I think well done all around. So thank you to staff. On that note, good night all. Let's adjourn.
Night.